Welcome, to the Cursed Hour, where every whisper in the dark, every creak in the floor, might be something watching threes. If you found this channel, you're already part of the curse. The darkness in the lab. A massive government building loomed in the night, its halls filled with scientific secrets, guarded by a man everyone trusted, a child, brought by biologist parents, played with paper planes, unaware that trust would lead to terror in the dark. The guard was kind, his smile warm, folding planes with skill, keeping the child company in the lonely lobby. But beneath his charm, a shadow grew, a plan hidden in his rounds, a betrayal waiting in the building's depths. Down to the basement they went, the child following, the guard's pace quickening with excitement. In a lab, he crafted a plane, a lure, and then the lights went out. The door locked, leaving the child alone, trapped in a nightmare. Darkness swallowed the room. Shadows danced like monsters, the child's cries echoing against cold walls. Panic reigned, the guard gone, his footsteps fading, his intentions a mystery that turned innocence into fear. The night endless. Hours later, parents found their child, the guard's lies unraveled, revealing a criminal scheme. He was gone, but the darkness lingered, a memory of betrayal, a shadow that haunted the child's dreams, a lesson in trust's fragility. My parents are both biologists. They met at work, and from there, it was history. Their love was born in labs, their lives intertwined with science, a partnership of minds. The place where they worked was a government building dedicated to biology research used in government projects turned towards the public. The building was a fortress of knowledge, its purpose noble, its halls alive with discovery, meaning they were the ones studying environment and making environmental protection laws around their studies. Their work shaped the world, their studies a shield for nature, their legacy and policy. This being a massive old government building, it always had a security guard present day and night. The structure was ancient, its walls heavy, its guards a constant presence. During the day, these security guards would mostly just stay at the reception and greet people. But at night, they would go do their rounds and make sure there were no intruders. The day was routine, the night vigilant, the building's secrets protected. Because of all the science equipment and computers kept in the building, the tools were valuable, the data priceless, a treasure worth guarding. Initially, one of the guards seemed like the nicest person he was, always really nice to me. And frankly, all the memories I have from him before this were really nice. His kindness was a light, his smile a comfort. My memories of him warm. He would greet me and talk to me in the nicest way every time my parents brought me to work. His words were gentle, his presence safe. A friend in the sterile halls. He would make me paper planes, which he was surprisingly good at, and throw them around with me. The planes were perfect, their folds precise, their flight a game we shared, and he would stay with me at the reception on days my parents had to work in the night. The lobby was my playground, his company my joy, the nights less lonely. Obviously for me, that would get really boring, really fast, so he'd keep me company and entertain me. The hours were long, the boredom heavy, his games a lifeline. Mostly we would talk play with the paper planes and watch TV. It all seemed nice enough. Our time was simple. The planes a delight, the TV a distraction, trust a growing thread. Nice enough for my parents to trust him with me, which was probably their biggest mistake. Their trust was blind, his kindness a mask, a mistake that would haunt us. My parents had to work even later than usual, And they were still at it, so this guy who was on the night shift decided to take me around the building with him to do his rounds. The night was late, the work endless, his offer a break from the lobby's stillness. We started on the top floor, checking all the rooms in the exterior part of the roof. The roof was high, the rooms dark, the air cold against my skin. Every room was so dark that I'd always stay a little behind and wait for him to turn on the lights. The darkness was heavy, my steps cautious, the light a relief I craved. Then we stepped down to the second floor where my parents' office and labs were. The floor was familiar, the labs alive, my parents' world just out of reach. We checked the opposite side of the building, going into labs with massive extractors, microscopes, and every kind of science equipment you might think of. The labs were a maze, their tools gleaming, a wonderland of science. We walked down the stairs to the first floor, where most of the administration rooms were. The stairs creaked, the floor quiet, its rooms a contrast to the labs above. I still remember seeing some maps on the walls and embalmed fish everywhere, serving as decorations. The maps were faded, the fish eerie, their glass eyes watching us pass. The first floor was all clear, so it was time to check the 2 basement levels. The basement was below, its depths unknown, a new stage for our rounds. I thought it would have made sense to check the labs on the right side first, as the left side had a flight of stairs at the end, leading up to where my parents were. But for some reason he decided we go check that side first. His choice was odd, the stairs a shortcut, his decision a shadow I didn't see. We checked all the labs, but I noticed his pace was accelerating, and he was starting to look and sound happier, excited even. His steps quickened, his voice bright, a change that felt wrong. Once again, we checked all of the labs, all the corners from one end to the other, turning the lights on ahead of us and turning them off behind us when we left. The routine was steady, the lights a dance, the labs a silent witness. When we got to the last area, he turned all the lights on, and he went inside. The room was stark, its lights harsh, his movements swift. There were 3 separate offices on each side of the lab, and on the first one, he hurried towards the printer, opened it up, took out 2 pieces of paper, and made 2 quick paper planes. His hands were quick, the planes familiar, a game I thought I knew. That's when everything changed. He picked up one of the planes, went outside of the office, and threw it towards the end of the room. The plane soared, its flight a lure, my excitement a trap. Then he told me the one he just threw was mine, and that we could throw them around in there. I ran to the other side of the room to pick my plane up, excited to play with it. My run was eager, the plane a prize, my joy a fleeting spark, and suddenly the lights went off. When I turned around to check what was happening, I saw him getting out of the lab and turning the lights off and locking the door. The dark was sudden, his exit swift, the lock a betrayal. I ran to the door, punched it and kicked it while screaming for him to open it. Panic taking over me because of how scared I was being in the dark. My fists were weak, my screams raw. Panic a tide I couldn't fight. Through the glass on the door, I could see him scaring away into the corridors, turning the lights off as he went, and disappearing after turning a corner. His figure faded. The lights died. His absence a void. I'm pretty sure that everything I felt, and every shadow and creepy monster I saw in there while waiting was part of my imagination because of how scared I was. The shadows moved. The monsters loomed. My fear, a creator of horrors. I balled up against the corner and could see shadows moving around me in the dark. I could only cry lost without knowing what was happening and why he was doing this. The corner was cold, the shadows alive, my tears a silent plea. My parents finished work eventually, And when they did, they packed their things and made their way to the lobby to pick me up and go home. Their work ended, their steps eager, the lobby their goal. When they got there, the security was at the reception, but I was nowhere to be found. The lobby was empty, my absence a shock, their fear a storm. They panicked, of course, and must have showered 100 different cuss words at the guy. I'm not sure how my dad didn't murder him right then and there. Their anger was fire, their words a storm, the guard their target. But when they first asked the guy where the hell I was, what he had done with me, he simply said that he had gone to do the rounds with me, and I must have gotten lost somewhere. His lie was smooth, his words a dodge, his excuse a hollow shield. This is a building that would take you a long time to check from top to bottom, even if you're rushing, so must have gotten lost somewhere. It's not exactly helpful. The building was vast, his answer vague, their search a desperate race. They looked for hours without finding me. It was only when I saw a far light at the end of the corridors leading to the lab that I was in that I got the courage to stand up, rush towards the door, and start punching as hard as I could. The light was hope, my fists a cry, my rescue a fragile dream. They finally found me there and made the guard unlock the door to get me out. Their voices were a lifeline, the door a barrier broken, my freedom a tearful relief. I don't really remember sleeping that night, and if I did, it must have been out of exhaustion. But I know I made my mom stay in the bedroom with me the entire night. Sleep was a ghost, my fear a weight, my mother's presence a shield. Of course, my parents made a complaint against the guard, and when they did, and the guy started being investigated, he was actually fired and arrested. Justice was swift, their complaint a spark, his fate sealed. Not because of locking me away where he probably hoped no one would find me, but because he had been partnering up with criminals to steal computers and equipment from the building to sell on some shady market, along with the information and the hard drives, and make money off of it. His crime was vast, his scheme dark, the building a target. By then, he had stolen a lot of old computers without anyone realizing, and who knows what his plans were for me that night. His theft was silent, his plans for me a shadow, a horror I escaped. I'm not convinced that locking a crying child in the middle of the darkness hidden away in some room is exactly the most normal behavior if you're not trying to hide them and get them later when everyone else has left, and sell them as a part of your product. His actions were a riddle, his intent a terror, my life a potential price. Luckily, he never had the chance to do that, and I really hope he never got to do it to any other kid. His arrest was a relief, his threat gone, my hope a prayer for others. The darkness of that night lingered, a scar on my childhood, a lesson in trust's fragility, a shadow I'd carry forever. The Pretty Kitty's Trap, the diner's neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a warm glow over the quiet parking lot as I wiped down tables. I was 21, a new waitress thrilled to have my first job, navigating the chaos of a restaurant during tough times. My 21 female was a waitress during the height of Co. It was my first ever job, and I remember being so excited to start. The late shifts were mine, a solitary dance with my cook. But one night, a trio walked in, their smiles hiding a trap I barely escaped. This is the story of a shift that taught me to trust my gut, and a red binder I'll never forget. The diner was my world, a small haven in a tourist town. As soon as possible after all my training was finished, and I got my certifications, we closed at 10 p.m. every night at the time, and typically it was just my cook. A 20-year-old guy, and I rarely would there be another waitress with me, and I liked it that way. I thrived alone, avoiding the other waitress's drama. I always worked better alone, and I didn't really get along with most of the other waitresses anyway, so it was actually nice. My mild anxiety made me doubt my instincts. I can remember it was near the end of my time there that this experience happened, and I'm really happy I had the circumstance I did. At the time, I never could really trust my gut very much, because I had mild anxiety and couldn't tell if what I felt half the time was valid or not. That night, I felt something real. I mentioned this because when this all went down, it felt real, and I had an absolute feeling. I started my shift, the last waitress leaving. I had started my shift that evening. I said goodbye to the last waitress, and I was on my own with my cook. The evening was slow, routine. Everything was pretty slow and normal. A call came about a special menu item, non-takeout, until I got a call about one of the specialty items on the limited time menu that we had. The food couldn't be ordered as takeout, and the lady over the phone really didn't take it well. She argued, then agreed to dine in. After a little debating, she finally decided to sit and eat instead. An old car pulled up, 3 people stepping out. I say around 10 to 20 minutes later. So when I spot an older-looking car pull up and 3 people came out, 2 men and a woman who looked to be in their 30s or 40s. The woman's attitude matched the caller's. I could tell that it was the same lady I spoke to over the phone. Judging by her attitude coming in, I further confirmed it by asking, since I already had a pretty good idea of what she wanted to eat. She softened, smiling too brightly. What I thought was an act of mild embarrassment and pettiness was actually something more sinister. Later on, her attitude towards me changed when she saw me. She was much nicer and more cooperative. I didn't suspect at first. This didn't ring any bells at first because it was something that most people who wanted to look good in front of others would do. I seated them, noting their red binder and pen. I sat them at a booth and took their orders. I noticed they had a red binder and a black pen. Remember this, I served other tables, their presence fading. I then went to tend to my other customers, as there were a couple other tables I was waiting on. They asked about realtors, common in our town. Once I brought their food out to them, they asked me if I knew any realtors. I found this to be fairly normal, as this being a tourist vacation state. It wasn't uncommon for outsiders to be looking for a getaway home. I shared a contact. Nonetheless, I gave them the phone number of a realtor I knew closely since I often went to church with her. Small talk filled their stay. There weren't any other notable interactions I really had, aside from occasional small talk, if I wasn't doing anything or refilling their drinks. They lingered, the last to leave. They were the last of my tables to leave the restaurant. We took a break outside, chatting with them. If any of you were in the food industry, you know that as a server, you don't really get breaks. Just a lunch most of the time, and sometimes not even that, if it's super busy. So my cook and I took this as an opportunity to take a well-deserved break. We walked out behind them and had a small chat with them. One man pulled my cook aside. I should mention by now that the front of the restaurant had a disabled ramp coming up to the doors. It was long because the building was on a raised foundation. This is important now. I didn't really notice it at the time, but one of the men took my cook to the other side of the ramp down near the end and was chatting with him over a cigarette. I stayed by the railing, talking to the others. I was behind the railing at the top of the platform, where the ramp plateaued. Luckily, the other man and the woman were on the other side of the railing about 5 feet below. But in front of me, we were having some small talk. Their questions turned personal, and they started to ask some personal questions such as if I lived in the area, if I smoked weed, how old I was, etc. Unease crept in. I hadn't quite learned yet that telling strangers such personal things wasn't a good idea. However, this for some reason was starting to raise some red flags. I dodged, but they pressed. I gave very vague answers to all of her questions as best as I could. Unfortunately, they still persisted in trying to have some sort of communication with me outside of my work. Whether or not I said no, the woman offered a job. I suppose when they finally realized that I wasn't going to give that information up, the woman finally got to her. Point, she told me that she had a business offer for me. It was for a cleaning service. It was no cleaning job. I don't like cleaning anyway, so regardless, I would have said no. However, what she said next solidified my answer. She proceeded to tell me that she owned a maid service called the Pretty Kitties Maid Service. She said that she needed pretty and young girls like me, and that she had 10 girls now, as it was, and she wanted to expand. She promised wealth. She mentioned how they got paid $30K. She didn't specify the time length and how it would be a great opportunity for me to help her with her business. Danger screamed in my mind. I instantly knew at that point that it certainly wasn't a maid business, and I was in danger. I refused, heart racing. However, I didn't understand just how much danger I was in. I politely declined her offer and told her I liked my job as it was, that I was satisfied working for my boss. She pushed, tempting me. She tried to further convince me by telling me how easy it was and reiterating how much I'd make under her supervision. She mentioned a van. She mentioned how she had a van for her business and described it to me. She urged me to her car. I can't exactly remember what she told me, but I do remember how she told me to follow her to her car. She said she'd show me a picture of her van. In her car, but her phone was in her hands. I stood firm, demanding her phone. I knew for certain I wasn't going anywhere with her or near that car. I declined yet again and said that I was fine, right where I was. I said she could show me on her phone instead, but she was hesitant. They left, her reluctance chilling, after which she proceeded to end the conversation and left with the two men. I told my cook, shaken, a little shaken. I walked back into the restaurant with my cook and told him what I had just experienced. He laughed it off. He joked about how I'd have good money if I went with him, because I didn't take the situation as seriously as I should have. I laughed with him. His grandmother's warning hit hard. At the end of that night, when the cook's grandmother came to pick us up, I mentioned the weird interaction. A panicked look came over her, and she sat silent, staring at me. I got confused and asked her if everything was okay. That's when I learned the signs of human trafficking. She broke it to me, that I was almost trafficked, and I was incredibly lucky. I didn't get kidnapped. My stomach dropped, and I started to panic at the realization of how much danger I was in. The next day, a man appeared. Nothing really happened after that, except for the red binder and the black pen. I told you to remember, I went to work the next day, and a customer walked in. He sat, watching me. I get into my apron and sit this shuttleman. He was well dressed, not in a suit and tie, but just nicely dressed. He was alone. I sat him at a single booth and took his order of one single coffee. He had a red binder and black pen with him. The binder unnerved me. I didn't even notice until my cook from the night before reminded me of it. I was so shocked at the fact, and it unsettled me even more. He lingered, his gaze heavy. He proceeded to sit there for 3 hours watching me as I tended to my tables. I questioned him, uneasy. I kept asking him if he needed anything else, and he asked me if people never just sat and relaxed with coffee. I sort of shrugged and said no. Not here. His phone call chilled me. I specifically remember him speaking over the phone about finances and how he needed to find another house. He spoke about moving money and how he was going to pay his girls that night. We acted, and he left. I ran to the back of the kitchen and told my cook. Thankfully, he came out with me to help deliver some plates in order to throw that guy off at works. I think he ended up leaving not long after that. I've stayed vigilant since. The binder a warning. I haven't seen or heard anything. I'll tell you, though, I've been much more on guard since then. The knife in the lot. The knife gleamed in his hand as he crawled under my bus, his hooded shadow a threat I barely escaped. The truck stop was no safe haven, its darkness hiding dangers that changed my nights forever. A car's horn blared, its beams blinding me. But it was the man with the knife under my bus that made my blood run cold. The lot was a trap, its secrets a warning I learned too late. He chased a man from the motel, then taunted me with rocks and horns. But when he slid under my bus with a blade, I knew the truck stop was a battlefield I'd never return to. The door handle clicked, a hooded figure with a knife lurking below. I locked myself in, heart pounding, as the truck stop revealed its true face, a place of predators, not rest. Yelling, running, a knife in the dark. The truck stop was alive with menace. His blade under my bus was the final straw, a terror that drove me from that lot for good. Back in 20, I had to go out and find an internship to be able to progress in my education. My degree demanded it, a stepping stone to a future I could barely see. But the job market was a wall, unyielding and cold. But at the time, it proved to be almost impossible to get one. Rejections piled up, each email a sting, my confidence fraying, my options shrinking. So while I was looking, I decided to take another job. Just to make sure we had food on the table. Survival trumped pride. My fiancé and I scraping by, our apartment a fortress of shared dreams and tight budgets. I found out a friend of my fiancé's family had his own handicap bus company. The connection was a lifeline, a chance to earn, to breathe, a kind of taxi service for wheelchair users or otherwise disabled people. The service was vital, a bridge for those the world often overlooked. Its mission noble, its demands relentless, and he needed someone to cover the night shift since it was a bus that had to be on call at least 22 hours a day. The hours were brutal, a marathon of vigilance. But they called to me. Seeing that I'm quite the night owl, I immediately told him that I'd be happy to take the job. My nocturnal nature was my strength, the dark my domain, the quiet a comfort. And after I got the needed license, I was hired. The license was a hurdle, a week of tests and training. But I cleared it, my hands steady, my resolve firm. The job was pretty basic: pick up people and drop them off where they needed to go. The routes were simple, the passengers kind, their gratitude a warmth in the cold nights, and sometimes use a machine to get wheelchairs up or down some stairs. The lift was clunky, its hum a rhythm I learned, each operation a small victory, a moment of connection. And when there were no trips, I drove to a designated area and did whatever while waiting. The downtime was my own, a pause in the night's pulse, the bus my sanctuary. I quickly found a truck stop in the area where I could park and catch some Z's while waiting. The truck stop was a beacon, its lights aglow in the dark, a hub of transient life. There was a gas station where I would buy coffee in the early hours of the shift. The coffee was bitter, its warmth a jolt, the cashier's nod a ritual of my nights. And on the other side of the gas station's parking lot, on the opposite side of the truck stop, there was a rundown restaurant with a motel connected to it. The restaurant was a relic, its neon sign flickering, the motel a shadow. Its room's a mystery I didn't seek to solve, to not disturb the sleeping truckers. If I got a trip in the middle of the night, I usually parked in the restaurant side. The restaurant's lot was quieter, its asphalt cracked, the motel's dim lights a faint guide. After parking there every night for a while, I noticed one particular room had a lot of people come and go. The activity was constant, a stream of figures, their faces blurred, their purpose unclear. In the beginning, I thought nothing of it. Curiosity was fleeting, my focus on rest, the room's secrets none of my concern. But then, one night at the end of the summer, while I was half asleep with the windows slightly open, I suddenly heard yelling coming from the motel. The sound was sharp, a crack in the night, voices raw with anger, fear, and a dude came tumbling out of the room and started running. His form was frantic, a blur of motion, his footsteps pounding, and a few seconds later, a big dude came running after him with something in his hand. I could not make out what it was. The pursuer was massive, his stride heavy, the object glinting, a threat I couldn't name. I thought that it was none of my business, and I went back to my half-sleeping waiting stage. Instinct urged distance, my role a driver, not a hero. The night's drama not mine to join. Not much time passed and my phone went off. I had a trip an hour's drive away. The call was a relief, a pull from the scene, my duty clear. So I turned on the bus and was leaving the parking lot when I saw the big guy coming around the corner. His silhouette loomed, his pace slowed, his gaze a shadow I avoided. The rest of the night I had back-to-back trips, so I didn't park until I got home. The night was a blur of roads, passengers, and city lights, the motel fading, the chase a memory I buried. The day after, I didn't get a return to home zone until 2 or 3 Unkem. The shift was long, my body weary. The truck stopped calling, its familiarity a comfort. When I arrived at the parking lot, the area where I used to park had fist-sized rocks strewn all over the place. The rocks were scattered, deliberate, a message I didn't read, not connecting the dots of the time I just parked a few spots over and started waiting. Ignorance was my shield, the rocks a puzzle I ignored, my mind on rest. I fell asleep pretty fast. Sleep came easy, the bus a cocoon, the night a blanket, my guard down. The rocks were a warning, the lot alive with eyes. The chase a prelude to a danger I didn't see. But I was jerked back into reality when a car right in front of my bus honked its horn, flashed the high beams, and revved its engine. The sound was a blast, the lights blinding, the engine a roar that shook my bones. I thought it was just some idiot who noticed me sleeping and found it funny trying to make me myself. Anger flared, my sleep stolen, the driver a prankster I'd confront. So I jumped out of the bus to tell him the off. My voice was ready, my fists clenched, the night my arena, my courage afire. But instead of driving off or stopping, the driver made this start-break thing with the car, indicating that I was the one who should off. The car lurched, stopped, a taunt, its message clear, my defiance, a mistake. And then I connected the dots, the rocks, the chase, the yelling. They aligned, a pattern of menace, the lot no longer safe. Not wanting to seem like a pushover, I stood still and stared at the car. My stance was firm, my gaze steady, a challenge to the unseen driver, my pride a shield. Not that I could actually see anything with the high beams almost blinding me. The light was a weapon, my vision burned, the driver a shadow behind the glare. And after what seemed like a really long time, but must not have been more than 30 seconds, the car drove off. The retreat was sudden, the car's roar fading, the lot quiet, my heart pounding. After that, I decided to park near the trucks from then on. The trucks were allies, their bulk a fortress, their drivers a silent guard. The restaurant side abandoned, its danger too real. A month or so passed. Nothing had happened since the car episode, and I figured that nothing more would, if I just kept parking by the trucks. Time dulled the fear, the lot's threat fading, my routine restored, the trucks my haven. The nights were long, the trips steady, the coffee bitter, the darkness a friend. I drove. I waited. I slept. The motel's lights a distant hum, its secrets locked away. The city moved, its pulse faint. My bus a small world, its engine a heartbeat I trusted. The truck stop was mine again. Its dangers a story I told myself was over. My vigilance softened, my guard lowered. Then, one night, I had a long 12-hour shift on a Sunday 6 p.m. to 6 in Kyasa. The shift was a marathon, its hours endless. My body a machine pushed to its edge, and I didn't have time to eat dinner before I worked that day. Hunger gnawed, my stomach a knot, the night unforgiving. And during the first half of my shift, I had back-to-back trips with no time to eat. The trips were relentless, a chain of pickups and drop-offs, the city a blur, my hunger a shadow. So when I got a return to home zone, I quickly parked in the far end of the almost empty truck stop. The lot was quiet, its expanse open, the trucks few, the night deep, and got ready to eat my now very late dinner that my fiancée packed for me. The meal was a gift, her care in every bite, a warmth I craved. I wanted to watch some TV on my phone while eating, so I sat with my back against the driver's side door and got comfy. The phone's glow was a comfort, Netflix a distraction, the bus my refuge. While turning my back to the door, I accidentally hit the door lock with my elbow, but that was my luck. The lock clicked, a small sound, a chance that saved me, my body unaware. As I was sitting there, scrolling Netflix on my phone, and heard the clack of the door handle behind me, smacked back in position. The sound was sharp, a jolt, my heart lurching, the handle's failure, a warning. I quickly turned and saw a dude with a hood over his head, quickly crouching and proceeding to lay down on the ground and crawling under the bus with a big-ass kitchen knife in his right hand. His form was a shock, the knife gleaming, his intent clear, a predator in my space. I quickly got up and made sure the other two doors were locked. My hands moved fast, the locks a lifeline, my breath short, my mind racing. And then I looked in all directions to see if I could still spot him. My eyes swept, the lot dark, the trucks silent, his shadow a threat below. He was still under the bus, and I was sure as hell not jumping out this time since the knife made his intentions pretty clear. Fear gripped me, the knife a promise of violence, the bus my cage, my haven. I turned on the engine, turned on the spots in the back of the bus, and looked around to see if it scared him off. The engine roared, the lights blazed, a weapon of sound and sight. My defiance a pulse. And lucky for me, it did. I saw him run off and into a bushy, woody area at the end of the truck stop. His retreat was frantic, a blur into the dark, the bushes swallowing him. My escape a miracle. I never parked that truck stop again after that night. I made sure all the doors were locked every time I was parked. The lot was dead to me, its danger a lesson, my vigilance a vow. The knife, the hood, the crawl, they burned into me, a scar on my nights, a story I carried, a fear that locked every door, a shadow I'd never outrun. The knife was gone, but the lot's threat lingered, its darkness a memory, my locks a promise I'd never break. The shadow in the lot. The Home Depot was a cavern of possibilities, its aisles promising tools to tackle my long-delayed projects. I went there to look at some power tools for some projects around the house that I've been putting off for a long time. The store was a ghost town, its quiet hum a contrast to the day's bustle. When I got to the store, it was quiet, and not many other people were there. I wandered to the power tool section, comparing prices, lost in thought. I went to the power tool section and looked at a few of them, and looked at some of the tools and their prices to compare. Why does it feel so empty? A man entered my aisle, his presence a subtle shift in the air. I was the only person in that area until a guy came into the aisle with me and started looking at something. Tall, in a gray sweatshirt, he lingered at the far end. He was at one end, and I was at the other. I wasn't really paying attention to him, but I knew he was there. Then he approached, his steps deliberate, and after he was there for about 2 or 3 minutes, I would say I saw him coming closer to me. I looked, and he was approaching me. His request for money caught me off guard. What does he want? He then asked me if I could lend him some money. I declined, unease creeping in, and left the aisle, forgetting my tools. I told the man, "Sorry, but no," and then decided to walk away. His muttered curse followed me. I heard the guy curse under his breath, and I went to another section of the store. I headed for batteries, hoping he'd vanish. I decided to walk around and get some batteries, which I also needed, and then go back over and hope that the guy was gone by then. But in the battery aisle, he reappeared, our eyes locking awkwardly. I walked around looking for the batteries, which were the far other end of the store. I got them, and as I was headed back, I saw the man. Once again, he was walking in my direction now, and we made really awkward eye contact as I walked past him. Is he following me? Back in the power tool section, he emerged again, his stare chilling. I walked all the way back to the other end into the power tools. I got to my original aisle and was there for about 30 seconds before I saw someone enter the aisle. Again, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed it was the same man as before. I glanced over for a split second. I saw that he was just staring at me and shaking his head. I grabbed my tools and headed to checkout, his shadow trailing. I finally made up my mind and got 2 power tools. Then I headed to the checkout. As I walked over, so did the man. At the register, he watched, empty-handed. Why is he still here? As I was checking out and paying for my items, I saw him just standing behind the check lanes watching me. I chose the entrance to exit, avoiding him, but he moved to intercept. Once I had paid and got my receipt, I started to walk over to the entrance as I was going to leave there because it was farther away from the man I saw. The man then started to head that way as well. A quick pivot to the other door saved me until I reached my car. I changed my mind and then turned around and suddenly went out to the other doors. This worked because I didn't see the man turn around. He was there, behind me, demanding I get out. I got out to the parking lot and thankfully didn't see the man at all. So I rushed to my car and got inside. But as soon as I had just shut my door and looked in the rearview mirror to leave there, he was. He was standing directly behind my car and staring at me. He then yelled at me to get out of my car. Can I escape him? The Home Depot was my destination that evening, a place to finally address the chores I'd ignored for too long, that I've been putting off for a long time. Its vast aisles, usually bustling, were eerily still, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows. It was quiet, and not many other people were there. I lingered in the power tool section, weighing options, the hum of the store my only company. Looked at some of the tools and their prices to compare. The solitude was calming, a chance to focus, until it wasn't. His arrival was subtle, a figure at the aisle's end, browsing with vague intent. A guy came into the aisle with me and started looking at something. I barely noticed him, my focus on drills and saws. I wasn't really paying attention to him, but I knew he was there. Then he moved closer, his height looming, 6'5", gray sweatshirt, ripped jeans, a scruffy beard framing a young face. The man was really tall, probably 6'5", and wore a gray sweatshirt and ripped jeans. He looked pretty young, and had a kind of ugly-looking beard. His greeting was casual, but his request for money was jarring. He said hi to me, and I said hi back to the man. He then asked me if I could lend him some money. My refusal was polite but firm, the interaction souring the air. Sorry, but no. His curse, low and bitter, chased me as I fled to another section. Curse under his breath, and I went to another section of the store. I realized too late I'd left without choosing tools. My mind rattled. It wasn't until I walked away that I realized I forgot the tools, and I hadn't even figured out which ones I was going to buy yet. I opted for batteries, a detour to clear my head, walked around and get some batteries, which I also needed. The store's far end offered a moment's peace until he appeared again. His presence in the battery aisle was no coincidence, his gaze locking with mine, heavy with unspoken intent. As I was headed back, I saw the man once again. He was walking in my direction now, and we made really awkward eye contact. Why was he here, after asking for money? I didn't want to know why the guy had asked me for money, but why would I give some random guy at Home Depot money? It was just weird. I hurried back to the power tools, hoping he'd moved on. I walked all the way back to the other end, but he followed, his stare a weight I couldn't shake. I noticed it was the same man as before. I glanced over for a split second. I saw that he was just staring at me and shaking his head. I steeled myself, refusing to be cowed, and selected my tools. I finally made up my mind and got 2 power tools. At the checkout, his shadow lingered, his empty hands a silent accusation. So did the man. I was getting sort of annoyed. Now by this guy following me, I saw him just standing behind the check lanes watching me. Fear crept in. What if he followed me outside? I was kind of afraid that he might try to jump me when we got out into the parking lot or something. The man wasn't buying anything and had nothing in his hands. I planned my exit, choosing the entrance to avoid him. I started to walk over to the entrance as I was going to leave there because it was farther away from the man. He moved to cut me off, his pace quickening. I saw the man then start to head that way as well, and he sped up his walk and started to go way ahead of me. I pivoted, darting to the exit near the check lanes, closer to my car. I changed my mind, and then turned around, and suddenly went out to the other doors. This worked because I didn't see the man turn around. It was better for me anyways, because my car was parked on that side. The lot seemed clear, relief washing over me. I got out to the parking lot and thankfully didn't see the man at all, so I rushed to my car and got inside. I was safe until I looked in the mirror. He stood behind my car, his eyes locked on me, his shout a command. But as soon as I had just shut my door and looked in the rearview mirror to leave there, he was standing directly behind my car and staring at me. He then yelled at me to get out of my car. My hands trembled as I locked the doors, the engine roaring to life. I locked the doors and started the engine. He lunged for the passenger door, tugging at the handle. That's when the man ran to my rear passenger's door and tried opening it. I reversed, tires screeching, and sped away. I quickly backed out and turned to the other direction, then sped away from there. His intentions were a mystery, but I was free. I'm not sure what the man planned on doing, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. The encounter left me rattled. The Home Depot no longer a place of mundane errands, but a stage for danger. The man's persistence, his silent pursuit through the aisles, was a threat I couldn't unsee. I drove home, eyes scanning the rear view, half expecting his shadow to reappear. Was he just desperate? Or something worse? The tools sat unused for days, their purpose overshadowed by the memory of his stare. A reminder that even the quietest places hide predators in plain sight. The watcher on the roof. The silence of the Cascades was shattered by a knock at my cabin door. Deep in the snowy wilderness, midway through the 4th day, there was a knock at the door. A pale man, snow clinging to his coat, stood too close, his smile too calm. He had a thick winter jacket on and a black wool hat. He asked for directions, but his lingering gaze chilled me. Was he lost, or had he found exactly what he wanted? My remote cabin was a haven until a stranger's boots crunched on my porch. I walked over and opened the door, as there wasn't any other way for me to see the porch from inside the cabin. His request for help seemed innocent, but hours later, I found his tracks circling my home. There were shoe prints in the snow walking around the back of the cabin. Why was he prowling? And what did he plan in the dark? The snow fell heavier, cloaking the forest. But danger was already at my door. The light snowfall from earlier had started to pick up. A man's knock came twice, his voice pleading from the cold. But I didn't trust him. "Hey, it's me again. I'm still lost. It's cold out here. Can you please help me?" Then a thud shook the cabin, and I knew he wasn't leaving. Was he hunting me, alone in the Cascades? I thought I was safe, but the night proved me wrong. I could see a set of footprints going up to the porch, but none leaving. A stranger returned, his presence relentless, his intentions hidden. The guy actually never left. He had climbed onto the roof of the cabin. The police found him up there, waiting. What was he planning in the shadows above? The cabin's warmth couldn't shield me from the fear outside. I felt really uneasy after seeing those shoe prints in the snow. A man's knocks grew desperate, but his earlier visit felt like a lie. There was a sudden thud against the cabin. Footprints showed he'd never left, lurking above me. I guess was just sitting up there waiting. How long had he been watching? And would he come back? I was spending the week in Washington at a cabin in the Cascades. The cabin was a rustic escape, nestled deep in the mountains, far from the hum of cities. It was pretty far out of the major cities, and was down a long dirt road with dense forest all around. A winding dirt road led to it, flanked by towering pines, their branches dusted with early winter snow. Winter was just starting, so there was a little bit of snow, but nothing too much. The air was crisp, the silence profound, a perfect retreat from my busy life. The first 3 days were great. It was peaceful quiet and relaxing. I'd planned a week of solitude, reading by the fire, hiking the trails, and soaking in the quiet. On the 4th day, I was settling into the rhythm of the place, chopping wood and brewing coffee, when an unexpected sound broke the calm. Midway through the 4th day, there was a knock at the door. The sharp rap startled me. No one should be out here. I had no idea who it was or who it could have been. The cabin had no peephole or porch-facing windows, so I had no choice but to open the door. I walked over and opened the door, as there wasn't any other way for me to see the porch from inside the cabin. A man stood on the porch, his presence jarring in the isolation. There was a man. He had a thick winter jacket on and a black wool hat. His heavy coat was flecked with snow, a black wool hat pulled low, and his cheeks were flushed red from the cold. His face was pale with red cheeks, and snow was sticking to his clothes. "How can I help you?" I asked, forcing a smile. "How can I help you?" He grinned, too friendly for a stranger in the wild. The man gave a friendly smile and said he was just a bit lost and wanted to know the way back into town. His story didn't add up. Town was an hour's drive away, a grueling walk in the snow. I was confused. Was he trying to walk the 1-hour drive to town in the cold and snow? How had he even reached my cabin? And how did he even get out here in the first place? I kept my doubts quiet, giving him directions. "Take a left here. Follow it to the main road. It's a straight shot from there. Take a left here and follow it to the main road. It's a straight shot from there." He nodded, his smile lingering too long. He smiled and nodded. A strange silence hung between us, his eyes fixed on mine. There was a strange pause for a few seconds as he just stood there, and neither of us spoke, uncomfortable. I closed the door, hearing his boots crunch away. I got uncomfortable and set by closing the door. I heard his boots walk off the porch soon after. The interaction was odd, but I pushed it aside, returning to my book by the fire. It was an interesting interaction for sure, but I went back to what I was doing and forgot about it. Hours later, the weather turned. The light snowfall from earlier had started to pick up. Snow fell steadily, coating the dirt road, and I worried about my car's ability to navigate it, which made me a little nervous because I wasn't sure how my car would handle the dirt roads with thick snow. To monitor the storm, I went to the back door, pulling the curtains aside for a view of the yard. To keep an eye on the weather, I went to the back door and pulled the curtains back. What I saw stopped me cold. Shoe prints in the snow, circling the cabin's rear. There were shoe prints in the snow walking around the back of the cabin. The tracks were unsettling in such a remote place. Again, I was so far out that anyone just walking around here was very strange. I couldn't tell their age. The snow was falling too fast. It was hard to tell how fresh the prints were, though. My mind flashed to the man at the door. My mind immediately thought back to the man who came by the door earlier. Had he been snooping before knocking, checking if the cabin was empty? Maybe he thought the cabin might be empty and was snooping around to find out. The thought was chilling. I felt really uneasy after seeing those shoe prints in the snow. As dusk fell, the unease grew. It didn't help that the sun had already set, too. The darkened wind made investigating impossible. It was too dark, cold, and windy outside to even try to look around. I secured the cabin, locking every door and closing the curtains. I closed the curtains and went around to make sure all the doors were locked. In the bedroom, I tried to distract myself with a laptop video. The wind howling outside. I just pulled up a video to watch on my laptop as I laid in bed. It took an hour to calm my nerves, the snow's steady patter lulling me. It took a while, like probably an hour, before I was feeling better. Just as I closed my laptop, a knock jolted me upright. A knock came from the front door. I physically jumped. My heart raced, fear flooding my veins. I stood still for a moment while I just felt my mind go blank from the sudden fear. Another knock, then a voice. "Hey, it's me again. I'm still lost. It's cold out here. Can you please help me?" "Hey, it's me again. I'm still lost. It's cold out here. Can you please help me?" It was him. Back again. It was the man who stopped by earlier. Why was he still here? Why the hell was he still around here? I crept to the main room. The knocking relentless. The man continuously knocking was extremely unsettling. After half a minute, It stopped, the wind's howl taking over. After, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds, the knocking stopped. The wind outside felt like it picked up. I needed to know if he was gone. I really wanted to know if he left though, or where he went. Staying low, I peered through a window with a view of the front yard. My only option was to look out one of the windows and didn't have a clear view of the porch, but I could see the front of the cabin leading up to the road. Footprints led to the porch, but none left. I could see a set of footprints going up to the porch, but none leaving. He was still there. He must still be at the door. I grabbed my phone, calling 911. The signal just strong enough. I walked back and got my phone. Service was good enough to call 911. The dispatcher estimated a 45-minute wait. They estimated it would be 12 minutes before they would make it. I locked myself in the bedroom, the silence eerie, knowing he was outside. I locked myself in the bedroom and waited. 10 minutes went by with not a single sound, which was really eerie. A loud thud shook the cabin, coming from the front. There was a sudden thud against the cabin. It was heavy, purposeful. Then silence again. It sounded like it came from the front of the cabin, and it was pretty loud. But then it was silent again. I trembled, time crawling as I waited. I was shaking and terrified. Time seemed to move extremely slow. Red and blue lights finally flashed outside. Eventually, red and blue lights began flashing outside the windows. Relieved, I moved toward the door, but froze at the officer's shout. "Get down!" I heard the officer yelling to get down. Chaos erupted. Yelling. Movement. Another thud. That thud sounded through the cabin again, followed by the officer yelling. The man had been on the roof, waiting. The guy actually never left. He had climbed onto the roof of the cabin. I guess was just sitting up there, waiting. The police arrested him for trespassing, but he admitted nothing else. The officer made him get down and arrested him for trespassing. He'd been around the cabin all day, his intentions unclear but ominous. It seemed like he'd been outside around my cabin for the entire day though, which is really disturbing. What he was really trying to do is unknown, but it likely was something really awful. I stayed in a hotel that night, the cabin no longer a sanctuary. I check X for similar stories, finding tales of prowlers in remote areas, but none match the calculated menace of the watcher on the roof. I've avoided that cabin since, but the fear of his return lingers, a shadow over every quiet night. The light in the empty store. I work at a 24/7 ice cream shop. It's a tiny place, a single room where 10 people could barely stand shoulder to shoulder. But it's the heart of our small town. It's a really small place, like one room that maybe 10 customers could stand in at a time. The shop hums with life during the day, but at night, it's just me and the neon glow of the sign outside. The place was actually pretty popular in our small town though. Kids love it, their laughter filling the air. But when the clock strikes midnight, why does the quiet feel so heavy? The parking lot was pretty big and had unoccupied or abandoned shops next to it. The lot stretches wide, a concrete sea bordered by the husks of forgotten stores. It was like a strip mall, except only the ice cream shop was still open. The other shops, once a pharmacy, a video rental, a diner, are boarded up, their windows dark, their signs faded. It was a common hangout spot for high schoolers. Teens gather in the lot, their cars circling until curfew. Why do those empty buildings feel like they're watching? I worked part-time overnight shifts. My hours are late, the world asleep, while I scoop ice cream for the rare night owl, typically from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. The shop is mine then, a kingdom of sticky counters and buzzing freezers. This night I got in, and the usual cleaning up the mess the previous workers left for me. It's routine. Wipe down, sweep up, toss out trash. It only took about 30 minutes, so after that, I just sat back and waited. The clock ticks slow, the night endless. What's out there in the dark, waiting for me to notice? Around 1 o'clock, a group of teens came in, but other than that, it was dead. Their chatter filled the shop briefly, then faded, leaving silence. Halfway through my shift, I got so bored that I decided to do some extra cleaning up around the back. I tackled the storage room, gathering trash to clear my head. I tossed a bunch of garbage out and headed outside to toss it into the dumpster. The night was still, the air cool. The dumpster was actually in the front of the shop, kind of on the side of the big parking lot near the other abandoned shops. I walked over, the lot empty, and that's when I saw it. A light flickered in the abandoned store next door. What was moving in that empty place? I noticed a light flicker in one of the abandoned shops. It was quick, a flash across the dusty windows. I thought it had to be a reflection of a car passing by or something, but the road was deserted, no cars in sight. After looking at the road, and again seeing no cars, I got really confused. My steps slowed, my eyes locked on the store. I walked slower, keeping my eyes on the front windows of the store and just waiting for something. Then it came again. A light shined past the windows for only a few seconds. It was like a flashlight, sweeping deep inside. Why was someone in there, so close to where I stood alone? It looked kind of like someone shining a flashlight around deep inside the back of the store. The beam was deliberate, searching, but vanished quickly. After that brief sighting, though it didn't happen again, I stood frozen, the trash bag heavy in my hand, my breath shallow. I really had no way to confirm anything. The shop was silent, its windows dark once more. The only part that kind of shook me about this was that the light was in the abandoned building that was attached to the ice cream shop. It was right there, just beyond the wall I leaned against every night. What was on the other side? So close I could almost hear it. I reassured myself that if it was someone in there, it was probably just some kids exploring the empty building. Teens sneak into abandoned places all the time, right? Completely harmless. I shook off the chill, tossing the trash into the dumpster, its clang echoing in the quiet. There really wasn't much else to do aside from wait around for the rest of my shift. I returned to the shop, the neon hum welcoming me back. I leaned against the counter and just stared out the front window, spacing out. The lot was empty, the night still, but my mind kept drifting to that light, that flicker in the dark. It was about 2 a.m. The hours crawled, the shop a cocoon of boredom. I heard something beside me, a faint tap, barely audible, pulled me from my daze. I looked at the wall, and it sounded again against the other side of the wall. It was soft, like a knuckle against wood, but in the silence, it was deafening. It was relatively quiet, though I only noticed it because the night was completely silent. My heart skipped, the light's memory rushing back. I quickly connected the dots between the sound and the light I saw in that building. I was 99% sure someone had broken into there. I thought about possibly calling the cops just to let them know. My hand hovered over my phone. The number half dialed. But my train of thought was interrupted when a customer walked in. The bell jingled, startling me. It was always strange when a single customer came in the middle of the night, like with no friends or anything. This man was different, unsettling. He was in his 40s, and he looked very unkempt, long, untrimmed beard, greasy hair, and a tired look all over his face. His clothes were worn, his stench sharp as he approached. As he walked up to the counter, His stench was almost unbearable. "Welcome in. What can I get for you?" My voice was steady, professional, but my nerves buzzed. He looked at me, then at the display case, then back up at me. His eyes were dull, sunken, holding mine too long. After a few seconds of him not saying anything, he smiled, backed up, and left out the door. The smile was wrong. Too wide. Too empty. I whispered what the hell under my breath, really creeped out by that encounter. The bell jingled as he left. The silence heavier now. It was insanely odd. That, along with whatever was going on in the empty building, was making this night really unnerving. I wasn't really sure what to do though, aside from just hope I was overthinking it. I stood behind the counter, my phone forgotten, the man's face lingering, to wait for my shift to end. The clock mocked me, each minute stretching, to clear my head a bit and just have a break from it all. I decided to take my lunch. Usually, I'd eat in the back, but the shop felt too small, too close to that wall. I grabbed my lunch bag and walked out to my car. The lot was empty, the night air cool against my skin. Why did I feel like I was being watched? I sat in there and ate while looking out the window. My sandwich was tasteless, my eyes scanning the lot. A few minutes passed and the night was still really quiet. The light in the store was gone, the windows dark. Then I saw someone come around the corner of the shop, followed by another person. My breath caught. I recognized the jacket being the same strange guy that came in only a few minutes ago. His beard, his stance, it was him. The other guy I hadn't seen before, but he had something in his hand. It glinted in the streetlight. I was far away, but I was reasonably certain that it was a flashlight. I felt a lump in my throat as I watched the men go into the ice cream shop. They didn't move like customers. Their steps quick, predatory. They start looking around, not like customers looking for someone to take their order, but like angry men searching for their victim. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone. I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, grounding. The men jumped over the counter and looked in the back room. They moved fast, checking corners, their intent clear, coming back out 30 seconds later and running out of the shop. They hadn't taken anything. No cash, no ice cream. They didn't steal anything. They were definitely looking for me. They ran around the back of the building and disappeared. My heart pounded. The phone still pressed to my ear. The operator kept me talking, promising help was coming. When cops got there, the men were gone. The shop was empty, the counter untouched, but the air felt violated. One of the abandoned stores had a door busted open though. The splintered wood told a story. Those men definitely had been in there. The flashlight, the sounds, the man's stare. What they were doing is still unknown. The police searched, found footprints, but no suspects. It seemed like the one guy came into the shop just to see if I was alone, then went back to get his buddy. His visit wasn't random. It was a scout. By chance, I happened to take my lunch in my car. That choice, that whim, saved me. If not, I don't know what would have happened. The thought was a knife. They were looking for me. Were they thieves, drifters, or something worse? The shop's wall, so thin, had hidden their plans. Their presence a shadow I'd felt but couldn't name. The cops were kind, their questions thorough, but the men were ghosts, vanished into the night. The incident changed the shop for me. I kept working, but the nights felt heavier, the wall a silent threat. I don't know what would have happened. I upgraded the locks, carried pepper spray, parked closer to the door. The owner installed cameras, but the lot stayed empty. The abandoned stores a reminder of how close I'd come. I told a coworker, a guy who'd worked there longer. He wasn't surprised. The abandoned shops had always drawn trouble. He said, "Kids, vagrants, worse. You got lucky," he told me, and I believed him. I researched the strip mall's history, finding old articles about its decline, stores closing, crime creeping in. Rumors swirled of a local crew using the empty buildings as a base, their deals and plans hidden in the dark. They ran around the back of the building. Were they watching, waiting for a lone worker like me? The man's stench, his smile, he smiled, backed up and left, haunted my shifts. A face I scanned for in every customer. The police found nothing. No arrests, no answers. But the busted door was proof. Someone had been there. The light in the empty store wasn't just a flicker. It was a warning. I saw someone come around the corner. That night rewrote my sense of safety. The shop no longer a haven, but a trap. I quit a few months later. The late shifts too much. The wall too close. The light in the empty store wasn't just a moment. It was a lesson. The quiet can hide hunters, and luck can be your only shield. I drive past sometimes, the neon sign still glowing, but the abandoned stores loom, their windows dark, their secrets kept. I don't know what would have happened, but I know I survived, and that's enough to carry me through the night. The intruder on the couch. Your home is your refuge, a quiet escape from the world. But what happens when the silence breaks and a stranger's footsteps echo through your walls? You're asleep, safe in bed, until a sound pulls you awake. A creak, rhythmic, unnatural. It's not the building settling. It's moving, closer, deliberate. You peer into the dark, and there he is. A man, walking through your home, ignoring you. He rummages, sits, waits. He's not here to steal. He's here for something else. This isn't a random break-in. It's a violation, a predator in your space. His motive's hidden. He knows your home, maybe even you, and he's not leaving. This is the night Sam learned their apartment wasn't safe. By the time you hear the end, you'll check your locks and listen for creaks in the dark. The apartment was a relic. Its peeling paint and creaking floors, a trade-off for affordability. Sam, scraping by on a tight budget, called it home for one reason. It was cheap. They live in a pretty old apartment. It was just cheap enough for them to live alone in it. So that was the only reason they lived there. It definitely had its issues, though. The building groaned with age, its quirks a constant companion. This was a regular night after getting out of work. They got home and heated up dinner, then sat on the couch to watch TV for the rest of the night. After a long shift, Sam collapsed onto the couch. The TVs murmur a soft lullaby. They were really tired already and weren't planning on staying up late. The dim lighting and the soft TV only made them more sleepy. They think they were only home for a short time before calling it for the night. They turned off the TV, went to their bedroom, and fell asleep quickly. Exhaustion pulled them under fast, the bedroom a cocoon of quiet. They didn't remember the weather being windy that night, and they only mentioned that because they woke up to a creaking sound. The building was old, so any light wind would often make it sway and cause these echoing creaks and rumbles through the walls. The old structure's noises were familiar, but this was different. Sam's eyes snapped open, the darkness thick with unease. The creak wasn't the building, it was alive, rhythmic, stalking through their home. They thought they heard wasn't the same as it usually was. As all these thoughts ran through their head, the creaking started again. And it didn't stop. It was almost in this rhythmic pattern, one creak followed by a second of silence, then another creak again and again, sounding like it was from somewhere on the other side of their apartment. The sound pulsed, steady, unnatural. They got out of bed. Their heart was pacing, but they still weren't totally convinced that it wasn't the old building. They opened their bedroom door. There was a hallway that led down to the front door, and at the end, on either side, was the kitchen and living room. They looked down the hallway, as they could now hear that the creaking was coming from the left side. It took them a moment, but they started to realize the sound was moving across the floor. And by the time they noticed it getting louder, they couldn't even react before seeing a figure suddenly appear at the end of the hallway. A man stepped into view, his silhouette stark against the dim light. Their entire body tensed up and froze, but the man didn't look at them. They kept walking slowly across the end of the hallway. They just stared ahead, never looking down the hallway. He didn't see them. His gaze fixed forward. Fear locked Sam's limbs, their breath shallow. The man moved, deliberate, through their space, as if he belonged there. Adrenaline pumped through them, and they moved back around the corner into their room. They didn't close the door, scared of making a sound. The creaking continued through the kitchen. A few times they stopped, and it sounded like they opened and closed a few of the cabinets before walking again. The sounds shifted, cabinets clattered, footsteps resumed. Their heart was racing even faster. How did he get in? And it had to be only a matter of time before he came walking down the hallway. Just as they were thinking this, they saw his shadow move toward the end of the hallway, but again he walked past it. He passed the hallway again, a ghost in their home. The creaking moved through the living room, and then they heard the soft squeak of them sitting on their couch. The sofa groaned under his weight, a chilling stillness following. Everything about this made no sense, making it even more horrifying. They crept over to their bed and got their phone, then texted 911. They were still too scared to call and risk them hearing them. Sam's fingers trembled, texting for help in silence. The minutes stretched, each creak a threat. The man waited, his purpose unclear, his presence a violation that chilled Sam's soul. The next few minutes were just full of tension and anxiety, knowing this guy was just on the other side of their apartment, sitting on their couch, and could at any moment get up and walk into their room. But he never did. The wait was agony, the stranger's stillness unnerving. They got a text that the officers were in the building and coming up to their door, so they gathered up their courage and sprinted down the hallway and opened the door for them. They stormed in and tackled the guy who'd barely even gotten up from the couch. Police flooded in, pinning the intruder. They didn't recognize the man at all. Apparently, he climbed up the side of the building and onto their balcony on the second story, which didn't even have a lock on the sliding door. He'd scaled the building, entering through an unsecured balcony. It seems almost impossible that this wasn't a specific break-in at their place, but the man denied everything. Said he was just trying to rob a random apartment, even though he had taken nothing and didn't even have a backpack to haul stuff in. He even sat on their couch and just chilled there like he was waiting for something. Plus, it would have been way easier to rob a first-story unit. Part of them wonders if their getting out of work early had anything to do with this. Like, did the guy somehow know their schedule? It was that why he was sitting on the couch thinking they weren't home yet and waiting for them. There's really no way to know. They think it's the uncertainty of what the man was doing that really makes this event so disturbing. Like, would he try it again in the future? And was he really targeting them? Or were they just incredibly unlucky? The man's motives remained a shadow, his denial unconvincing. Sam moved soon after. The apartment's creaks now a warning, the couch a reminder of a night when safety was a lie. The fire, below the forest. Winter's grip had loosened, the frost fading, beckoning a hiker to a remote campsite nestled deep in the woods. He sought solitude in the forest's embrace, unaware that the silence held a spark, a danger waiting to ignite. At an overlook, the sunset painted the sky, but a fire burned below, unattended, its flames licking the trees. No tent, no people, just a blaze growing larger, a mystery in the twilight, a threat to the forest's peace. He descended, flashlight in hand, the crackling fire the only sound in the dark. The flames roared, logs unlit beneath, a deliberate act, not an accident, a fire meant to burn long, to consume. Its creator gone, soil doused the blaze, the forest saved. But the night turned colder. Footsteps echoed as he packed to leave, a figure emerging from the shadows, watching, silent, its presence a chill deeper than the frost. He fled, the watcher unmoving, the fire's maker unknown. The forest held its secrets, the flames a question unanswered, a warning etched in the hiker's mind, a shadow that followed him beyond the trees. It was still winter, but the snow and cold around here had mostly died down. The air was crisp, the snow a memory, the season softening its hold. The ground was still frosted in the mornings most days, but it was just warming up enough for me to start getting back into my outdoor hobbies. Hiking, camping, biking, all that sort of stuff. The frost was thin, the warmth a promise, my passions reawakening, that I had to put on hold for the last few months. The winter had been a cage, my hobbies dormant, my spirit restless. I drove out to a place I'd been to just last fall. I liked it because it was far out and unpopular, just a nice place to relax and enjoy the scenery alone. The spot was a haven, its isolation a gift, my solitude a choice. I parked on the side of the road and hiked down to the campsite. The road was quiet, the trail steep, my steps eager for the escape. It wasn't more than a small dirt circle with a bit of an overlook of the forest. The site was simple, the overlook a perch, the forest a canvas below. I set my things up. The sun was coming down already. The sky was gold, the sun low, my camp a shadow in the light. I always liked getting to the campsite late and just eating and going to sleep right away. The routine was comforting, the night close, sleep a welcome friend. I went out to grab some sticks to prep for a small fire, and after that, I walked to the overlook to watch the sunset. The sticks were dry, the fire planned, the overlook a stage for the sun's descent. I was only sitting there for a little bit before I noticed a fire below me. The flames were sudden, their glow a shock, a beacon in the trees. It was down the hill, not too far away. Sitting among the trees, I could see it pretty clearly. The fire was vivid, its light sharp, the trees a frame around its blaze. And what was really strange was that there was nothing else there. No tent, no chairs, and no people around the campfire was left completely unattended. The absence was eerie, the fire alone, its solitude a warning. That was not only really dangerous but also really odd. It doesn't burn forever, so someone had to have lit it up recently only to leave it. The danger was real, the timing wrong, the fire a riddle in the dusk. I thought they'd have to be back at some point. So I sat there and watched it for a while. My vigil was steady, the fire my focus, waiting for its maker. The sun had fully set, and there were no signs of anyone down there. The night was full, the forest dark, the fire's creator absent. Strangely, the fire seemed to pick up, though almost like they had put full logs under the sticks, so that it would burn longer and larger like a bonfire. The flames grew, the logs deliberate, the fire a threat unfolding. I was getting worried, especially with me being so close. I decided to go down and just check in on it, and maybe put it out myself if nobody else was there. Concern was a weight, the fire a danger, My decision, a necessity. It was only about a short walk to get there, but with the dark out, I had to use my flashlight. The path was dim, the flashlight faint, my steps cautious in the night. Approaching the campfire, it was very quiet. The sound of the flame crackling in the wind was the only sound. The silence was heavy, the crackle a voice, the forest holding its breath. I walked up to it. The flame was already too high and nearly out of control. And yet, there were still more logs under it that had yet to light. The fire was wild. The logs a plan. The blaze a deliberate act. There was no way this was an accident. I started grabbing the wet soil and tossing it on top of the wood. The intent was clear. The soil my tool, the fire my foe. It was working decently, bringing the flame down enough for me to reach under and remove the larger unlit logs. The flames receded, the logs heavy, my hand steady with purpose. It was suddenly so quiet and dark, I turned my flashlight back on and began walking back. The silence was stark, the dark complete, my flashlight a fragile guide. I decided I wasn't comfortable staying here, not with whoever was out there. I got back and started packing. The unease was a shadow, the forest unsafe, my departure a need. Midway through, I heard footsteps nearby. I looked out and saw the outline of someone walking up to my campsite. The sound was a jolt, the figure a threat. My camp invaded. I stood up and faced them. "Hey, did you light that fire?" The person stopped and stood there still, covered by the dark. My voice was firm. The figure still. The darkness, their shield. "Hello, I see you out there. Can you just answer my question?" I yelled again, but got no response. My shout was desperate, their silence chilling. Fear, a growing tide. An eerie feeling came over me. I needed to leave now. I kept packing all the while that person stayed there watching me the whole time. The feeling was cold, their gaze a weight, my packing a race against fear. I finally tossed my bag on my shoulders and started walking. They stayed there for as long as I could see them. The bag was heavy, my steps quick, their presence a lingering shadow. I got back to my car and reported it to the police. The car was a refuge, the report a duty, my safety reclaimed. Everything about that situation is still unknown. Though who was that out there? Were they trying to start a huge forest fire, or had they seen me arrive and for some reason built it to get my attention? The questions were endless, the intent unclear, the fire a mystery. Thankfully, I didn't stay to find out. My escape was a gift, the forest a warning, the night a memory I'd carry. The Machete Man's warning. The Florida woods stretched wide, their tangled pines a call back to our Boy Scout days. My two buddies and I, bound by old campfire memories, pitched our tents in a primitive campsite, ready for a weekend escape. A few buddies and I who were Boy Scouts together back in the day liked to plan camping trips out into the woods every once in a while. Since we have that history together, things have always gone pretty smoothly. We knew bears, snakes, and spiders, but not men. Across the dirt road, a stranger watched, his machete gleaming, his words a threat we couldn't unhear. This is the story of a campsite too close to danger, and a laugh that saved us all. Our trips were rituals, honed by scout training. However, we've run into something that our days of scouts didn't prepare us for. We were always trained to watch out for wild animals, poisonous plants, and venomous spiders, and that sort of thing. But we were never told to consider that even in the deep woods, you could still run into people. We booked a cheap site, expecting solitude. The first encounter took place in my home state of Florida. Two buddies and I booked a cheap primitive campsite for the weekend. But when we got there, we realized that the place wasn't exactly secluded. It sat near a dirt road, close to a highway. It was right on a dirt road, just a few miles away from a rural highway. Campsites lined the path, mostly empty. There were dozens of campsites lined up against the path all around us. Most of them were empty. A family camped far off, settled in. But about a quarter-mile farther down was a family that looked like they were set up to live out there. Across from us, a man stood alone, and right across the dirt road from us was a strange man who was by himself, camping out of his Subaru. He watched us, silent, machete at his hip. He didn't say anything to us while we were setting up, but all three of us made note that he was watching us. Not only that he had a large machete holstered to his hip, his demeanor screamed recluse. From his general demeanor, we figured he was some kind of societal reject who chose to spend most of his time alone in the woods for his own comfort and the safety of others. We kept our distance, uneasy. The entire first day he kept his distance. We weren't that far apart, though maybe 30 feet from the edge of our campsite to his. He'd hear us all night. We had to accept that he would probably be listening to us all night. The first night passed quietly. Luckily, the first night went fine. Day 2, he approached, and on the second day he started warming up to us. We hunted for firewood, and he offered advice. A buddy and I ventured into the shrubs to gather firewood, and he came by and told us where we could get better material that wasn't all rotted out like the stuff we were getting. We nodded, but his nerves unsettled us. We said we would consider it, but he was acting way too suspicious for us to actually do it. He stuttered and drooled a lot, twisting his hand over the hilt of his machete, like he was nervous, even scared stiff of us. He seemed unused to people. It seemed like he was completely unadjusted to being around people. We relaxed, slightly, but after he tried to help us out during our first real interaction, we allowed ourselves to relax a little bit. He was odd, but harmless. We thought, if anything, he would be an entertaining neighbor for the weekend, and since we outnumbered him 3-1, we felt like he didn't pose a threat to us. Then, cars rolled in. As the day wound up, there was an unexpected development. It started with just one car rolling through and parking in the campsite right next to the machete man. More followed. A city crowd. Immediately, we all started to watch for his reaction. He was clearly agitated by this, but it wasn't over. We looked on in awe as one car became 2, then 3, then 4. Eventually, 5. They were loud, urban millennials. It was a large group of purebred millennial city folk that booked 3 campsites right next to each other. He glared, tense. It was fortunate for them that they had unwittingly encroached upon the personal space of the machete-wielding hermit. The way he spied on us looked tame in comparison to the death glare he was giving these people. He tried to act normal, but it was clear his whole body was tensing up. The newcomer's dog sparked trouble. Things almost got bad when the dog showed up. There were 2 dogs, actually, but the owners of one were letting the animal roam off the leash. It bounded to his sight, playful. It was only a matter of minutes before their dog ran over to the machete man's campsite and started to jump on him with typical puppy-like excitement. He snapped, barking back. We heard the machete man literally bark back at the dog, and we all looked over to see this happening. He looked ready to kill. The man was frozen stiff, like he was taking everything in his power not to snap, pull out his machete and chop the dog's head off right then and there. The owner restrained the dog. Quickly, the dog's owner ran over and contained their pet. He threatened violence. And that's when we heard him say something alarming. "Next time that damn dog comes over here, I'm going to shoot the dog." The city folk stayed calm. We thought this would give the city folk the impression that they shouldn't just act like they owned the whole place, but surprisingly, they were pretty unfazed. They leashed their dog, but their noise grew. They kept their dog on the leash after that encounter. But as night fell, they became even more intrusive. Their dogs barked constantly, and there were several simultaneous conversations out of the 10 or so people there, which were constantly shouting over each other so they could be heard to the point to where we could make out every single word. Some of them were saying. We mocked them, laughing. We spent the whole night in hushed tones, making fun of the ridiculous, out-of-touch things we heard. From them, my friend came up with a pretty good impression of the most obnoxious of the bunch and would repeat everything he said with a mocking tone. Cold drove us to our hammocks. Once our fire died down and the temperature dropped, we called it a night and crawled into our hammocks. Morning brought a confrontation. It was pretty frigid by the Florida standards, so when I woke up at daybreak, I was too cold to get up, so I shut my eyes to sleep in. The next time I opened my eyes, I saw that same friend crouched by the fire pit, trying to get the coals from last night to catch on. I stayed put, eyes half closed. I wasn't in the mood to get up until the fire was going, so I shut my eyes again. Then a bit later, I heard voices. My eyes shot open when I realized that one of them was a machete man. He was standing over my friend, who was crouched by the pit well into our campsite, with his hand resting on the hilt. As usual, I listened, feigning sleep. I pretended to stay asleep and listened to their conversation from my hammock. "Which one of you was doing that dumbass voice?" he asked. My friend stammered, and eventually replied, "That was me." Tension hung heavy. A brief silence caused me to choke up, half expecting the man to pull out his machete. He laughed, easing us. That's not what happened. Thankfully, instead, he laughed awkwardly. "Man," he shouted, "you guys had me rolling in my tent last night." My friend relaxed. My friend sighed with audible relief. "That's cool, man. We thought it was pretty funny," he said. His next words froze us. That's when the machete man leaned in and muttered something else. "I'm serious, guys. I was this close. If you guys hadn't have got me laughing last night like that. I was about 10 seconds from going over there with a 9mm and making them shut up." He ranted, hating city folk. The man kept talking. "I hate when those goddamn city people come out here. They ought to stay in Orlando. You guys ain't from there, are you?" No, we're not from Orlando," my friend lied. "We're from Gainesville area." That's not too bad," he said. He planned to drive them off. "Well, anyway, I'm going to go back and try to get them to leave. See y'all later." We were stunned. At last, he turned around and walked back to his campsite once he was out of earshot. My friend looked at me, noticing my wide-open eyes, and asked, "Did you hear that?" "Yeah, man. Good thing we're leaving today, right?" Our third friend woke, clueless. Right around then, our other friend woke up and crawled out of his hammock, totally oblivious until we filled him in. We left early, haunted. After that, we unanimously agreed to call off the trip. If a few hours early, we skipped breakfast at camp and packed everything up, leaving well before 10 o'clock. We tried to pass it off as a joke, but when it was said, it sounded more serious than we wanted it to. I don't remember who said it, but one of us did. What if we get home and we see on the news that some guy shot up a whole campsite full of people from Orlando? Thankfully, that never happened. But when we left, it really felt like we were abandoning those people to their fate. Our humor saved us, but guilt lingered. I dread to think of what might have happened if we hadn't brought a sense of humor to that situation. We were definitely caught off guard by it, and I couldn't think of any other way to handle it. Nobody expects to be overcrowded when they go primitive camping. The mimic in the woods. Her eyes glowed white in the dark, her voice my own, echoing my words as she glided closer. The forest hid her truth, a mimic wearing Haley's face, a warning that ended my nights in the wild. It spoke with my voice, moved with my steps, a shadow in Haley's clothes, its gaze a chill that froze my soul. The woods reclaimed their domain, and I fled, never to camp again. The thing in the woods wasn't Haley, though it wore her skin. Its white eyes and mocking voice followed me, a forest spirit angered by our disrespect. Its presence a scar I'll never shake. She matched my every move, her voice a mirror, her form a lie. The forest breathed with her, a mimic born of our sins, its stare a vow that drove us from its heart. In the moonlight, it stood, Haley's double with glowing eyes, repeating my pleas. The woods were alive, their guardian a mimic, and I left them, haunted by a truth no one believed. I took a break from camping for a couple years, but I recently went on my first trip in a while. The hiatus was forced, a retreat from the woods after shadows and whispers I couldn't explain. But the call of the forest lingered, a pull I couldn't resist. There were 4 of us going in total. Our group was a mix of old bonds and new faces, a chance to reclaim the joy of nights under the stars. I brought some of the friends that have gone with me before, Stephen and Mark, my companions from past trips, their laughter a familiar comfort, their presence a tether to memories of simpler times, and one of them brought their new fiancé. Haley was new, Stephen's partner, her smile bright, her energy a spark in our circle, a stranger I hoped would fit. I booked a familiar campsite. The site was a touchstone, a place of campfires and stories, its trails etched in my mind, a haven I trusted. But in the time I was away, it became different from how I remembered it. The forest had changed, its face reshaped, a stranger wearing a familiar mask. The trees were healthier, the shrubs were thicker, and in general, the foliage was more colorful and abundant. The pines stood taller, their needles vibrant, the undergrowth a riot of green and red, life pulsing where decay once lingered. The foot trails that used to snake through the woods around the site were completely overgrown. Paths I knew by heart were gone, swallowed by ferns and vines. The forest, a conqueror reclaiming its own. People must have forgotten about that area for a couple of years, through the lockdown, so of course the forest moved in to take it right back. The world had paused, humans absent, and nature surged, its claim fierce, its beauty what? The drive was long, our car packed with gear, the road winding through hills that grew denser, darker, the forest's edge a promise of escape. We arrived at dusk, the campsite a clearing ringed by towering trees, their branches a canopy that dimmed the fading light. The air was crisp, scented with pine and earth, a welcome I'd missed. We set up tents, the rhythm familiar, our voices mingling with the forest's hum, a chorus of crickets and rustling leaves. But a shadow hung over me, a sense of unease I couldn't place. The forest's vibrancy a mask for something deeper, something watching. However, my fellow campers were not appreciative of this. Their mood was off, their respect for the wild absent. A shift that grated against my love for this place. In the past, we were all on the same page about respecting the woods. We'd tread lightly, leave no trace, honor the forest as guests, its rules our creed. But this time around, they were acting different. Their laughter was reckless, their actions careless, a discord that soured the air. I can't say I blame them. The last few years have been tough. And it's good to let loose. The weight of the world had worn them. Their need for release, a fire I understood, but their disregard was a wound. But it's also always crucial to remember that you're a guest in nature's domain when you're in the wilderness. The forest demanded respect. Its silence, a law. Its patience, a limit we tested. Unfortunately, as soon as we were set up, all of my friends started to act like a bunch of college kids. The campsite became their playground. Their restraint gone. Their actions a rebellion against the wild. They were snapping branches off of trees because they were supposedly in the way. The trees bled sap, their limbs torn, the sound of breaking wood a violation. Drinking excessive amounts of beer and throwing the empty cans into the woods. Cans glinted in the undergrowth, a litter of aluminum. The forest's purity defiled, and even spreading hot coals from the fire pit into the rest of the campsite just to play with the fire by watching it catch and stamping it out moments before it got out of control. The coals sparked, flames licking dry leaves, their game a dance with disaster. The forest's breath held. They were literally breaking every possible rule. I got upset with them, and I told them to cut it out. My voice was sharp, my anger raw. Their disrespect a betrayal of our bond, of the woods. But they more or less just shoved a beer in my hand and told me to chill. Their dismissal stung, their laughter a wall, my warning a whisper they ignored. I tried to enjoy my time, but as the evening wore down, so did I. The fire's glow was no comfort, their voices grating, my heart heavy with the forest's silent plea. While everybody else sat around the fire, I turned in early. My tent was a refuge, its canvas a shield, the night a weight I carried alone. I was restless, even though I wasn't even that physically tired in the first place. Sleep eluded me, my mind churning. The forest's pulse a rhythm I couldn't match. I was just in a bad mood, and they were all talking extremely loud and needlessly yelling about nonsense. Their noise was a storm, their shouts a mockery, the woods a witness to their folly. The tent was dark, the air cool, the sounds of the forest muted by their clamor. I lay still, my sleeping bag a cocoon, my thoughts a tangle of frustration and dread. The crickets sang, their song a faint protest, the wind a whisper through the pines. I didn't check the time, but I know it was late when they finally called it a night. Their voices faded, their laughter stilled, the campsite quiet, a fragile peace. It was like the whole forest took a breath when they all shut up and passed out. The silence was profound, a release, the woods exhaling. Their presence a burden lifted. I laid there listening to the bugs for a while, long enough to be the only person left awake. The insects hummed, a chorus of life, their song a lullaby I couldn't follow, my restlessness a chain. The forest was silent, but it watched, its eyes in the shadows, its patience thinning, our disrespect a debt unpaid. Then I got up to pee one more time. The need was urgent, a pull from my tent, the night calling. I crawled out and walked to the tree line around the campsite to unzip. The air was sharp, the ground soft, the trees a wall of shadow at the clearing's edge. Naturally, my eyes drifted off into the darkness of the woods. The forest was a void, its depths unseen, a mystery that drew my gaze. Looking up, I could see the crescent moon peeking through the sky. Its light was faint, a sliver of silver, the stars hidden, the night deep. Then looking forward, it was just all trees and shadows, till I saw something else, a pair of eyes looking straight at me, almost glowing white. The sight was a shock. A jolt of fear. The eyes bright, unnatural. A predator's stare in the dark. I immediately jumped in surprise and covered myself up. My hands moved fast, my heart racing, the eyes a threat I couldn't name. Looking away for a mere split second, looking back, and I saw the eyes had moved closer. The movement was swift, silent. The distance halved, their glow sharper, close enough to make out the tiniest bit of detail in the moonlight. The light revealed a form, human yet wrong. Its presence a chill in my bones. It was a person, or at least it seemed like a person, just standing out in the open. The figure was stark, a silhouette against the trees, its humanity a question. There was something bone-chilling about them. Fear gripped me, a primal dread. Their stillness a menace, their gaze a weight. I knew I had to call them out, but I was nearly too afraid to speak. My voice caught, my throat tight. The words a risk I barely took. "Hey, who's there?" My shout was weak, a plea in the dark, the silence a reply that deepened my fear. When they didn't respond, I thought to shine my flashlight on them. The flashlight was my weapon, its beam a truth I needed. I fumbled through my pocket for the little one I'd taken out with me. My fingers shook, the device small, my grip unsteady. Again looking away for a single second before clicking it on and shining the beam on them. The light flared, a blade in the night, my eyes searching. Of course they had moved again a full 10 feet or so, and now there was only 30 feet between us. The distance closed, their speed unnatural, my breath short, my fear a tide. I cursed in fear, but now that I had some light on them, more details came into focus. The beam revealed truth, a form I knew, yet didn't, a nightmare in familiar skin. I was in disbelief at first, but I was looking right at my friend's fiancé, Haley's face, her clothes, her frame, but wrong. A copy flawed by its eyes, its stance. She was in the same clothes I'd seen her last wearing, looking exactly like she normally does. Her jacket, her jeans, a perfect replica, a mask too precise, except the abnormally reflective whites of her eyes, and the way she was standing like she was being held up by strings. Her eyes were voids, glowing, her posture puppet-like, a marionette in the dark. Her eyes burned white, her form a lie, the forest her stage, its will a force I couldn't fight. "Haley," I called out to her, "what are you doing?" My voice trembled, a question born of hope, her name a plea for normalcy. There was a brief pause, then at last they said something, but I was taken aback by what I heard. The silence broke, a sound that chilled my soul. "What are you doing?" They copied not only my words, but my voice too. The mimicry was exact. My tone, my cadence. A mirror that mocked. A violation of self. They sounded exactly like me. But Haley was not an impressionist. She didn't have any party tricks like that. Her voice was wrong. Her skill impossible. The truth a fracture in my mind. So in confusion, I took a step back. And without hesitation, they took a step forward, matching my movement exactly. The mimic was a shadow, my mirror, its step a dance of dread, its intent a mystery. I stopped backpedaling when I noticed this, and I tried to squint to get a better look at them. My eyes strained, the light wavering, her form clearer, yet stranger. That's when I had the thought that maybe she was sick or something. Hope clung, a frail wish, a chance she was human. Lost. It was a hopeful thought, because otherwise, if I wasn't looking at Haley, I didn't know what I was looking at. Fear whispered truth, a doubt that grew, the figure a question I couldn't answer. "Haley, it's late. I said you shouldn't be out of your tent like that. Are you feeling all right? Do you need any help?" My words were gentle, a lifeline, my voice steady despite the dread. Again, she didn't reply in her own voice, but in mine. "You shouldn't be out of your tent like that." The echo was a blade, my words twisted, her mimicry a threat, a chill ran down my spine. Suddenly I knew whatever was going on, I wasn't equipped to handle it on my own. Instinct screamed retreat. The forest, no ally. The figure, a foe beyond me. I walked backwards towards the tents, keeping an eye on Haley as they followed me step for step. My steps were slow, my gaze locked, her movements fluid, unnatural, almost gliding through the air like a marionette. Her glide was eerie, a puppet's grace. The forest, her strings, her will, its own. When I got to my friend's tent, Haley was past the tree line and standing in the clearing. She loomed, a specter in the open, her presence a violation of our space. I started rapping on the canvas and yelling at her fiancé to wake up. My fists pounded, my voice raw, a desperate call to break the spell. "Steven, get up. We got to help Haley, come on." "Man, get your ass up." My shouts were urgent, my fear a fire. Steven's name a lifeline. The flap unzipped and Steven peeked his head out, looking confused and annoyed. His face was groggy, his eyes narrow, my panic a puzzle. "What are you talking about, man?" He groaned. "Haley's fine, dude. She's right here." His words were a shock, a truth I couldn't grasp. He pulled back the tent flap and showed me inside his tent, where I shined my light, and I saw Haley in her sleeping bag, just starting to stir from all the commotion. The real Haley, asleep, her breath soft, her form human, alive. What the hell? I muttered, dumbfounded, but I swear she was just out there. My voice broke, my mind reeling. The mimic a lie, a trick of the dark. I turned around and shined the light back to where I'd just seen Haley, but nobody was there. The clearing was empty, the light sweeping, no trace of her double. The forest silent, nothing at all, not a trace. The absence was a wound, her presence a ghost. My fear, a truth no one shared. "Are you all right, man?" Steven asked me. "You seem a little freaked out." His concern was faint, his tone dismissive. My terror, a burden he didn't carry. "Yeah, I am really freaked out," I shouted in an outburst. I don't know what the hell I just saw. My voice was raw, my fear spilling, the truth, a weight I couldn't hold. "But there's nothing there, bro." Steven pointed into the woods where there was indeed nothing there, or at least not any longer. His gesture was final, the woods empty. My story, a shadow he brushed away. Tried to convince him that I seen something, but he brushed me off and told me to go back to sleep. His dismissal was a wall, his logic a cage, my truth a delusion to him. He shut me out of his tent, but there was no way I could go back to mine and relax. Sleep was impossible. My tent a trap, the night alive with threat. Instead, I sat around the fire and stirred the coals back to life, and that's where I stayed for the rest of the night on guard duty in case that thing came back. The fire was my ally, its glow a shield, the coals a pulse I tended. My eyes on the dark, I was fraught with paranoia the whole time. Every sound I heard sent chills of pure adrenaline through my whole body. The forest whispered, each rustle a threat, each snap a promise of those eyes. their glow a nightmare waiting. The mimic was gone, but the forest remembered, its eyes in every shadow, its voice a whisper I'd never unhear. At first light, I put my foot down. Dawn broke, gray and cold, the forest stirring, my resolve iron. I woke everybody up and forced them to pack their things and go home. My voice was firm, my decision final. The campsite no longer ours. I made the executive decision to call off the trip, much to everybody else's many complaints. Their protests were loud, their anger sharp. My choice a betrayal they couldn't forgive. None of them took me seriously. In fact, they all tried to convince me I was hallucinating. Their doubt was a chorus, their words a sting. My truth, a madness, they refused. But we had taken my car, and half the gear they were using was mine, so they had no choice but to go with me. My control was my power. The car, my weapon. Their reliance a chain I pulled. The entire car ride back home was silent. The silence was heavy, a wall between us. Our friendship fractured. The forest's shadow a passenger. I haven't been on good terms with any of them since. The rift was deep, their calls unanswered, our bond broken by those eyes. That voice. They all want me to get my head checked, but I know I'm not crazy. Their judgment lingered, a weight I carried, but my truth was clear, my sanity intact. If anyone thinks they might have heard about anything like what I saw, it would help me a lot to be able to research it. The need for answers burned, a quest for proof, a hope to name the mimic, to understand its will. The best that I can figure is something that lives out there. Got quite comfortable with all the humans disappearing for a while. The forest had grown bold, its spirits free. Our absence, a gift it cherished. Our return, a trespass. And the party I brought with me was not gracious enough to earn a welcome return. Our disrespect was a sin. Our noise a challenge. The mimic a guardian of the wild's law. That maybe I really am going off the deep end. Doubt crept in. A whisper of madness. A fear I fought. My truth, a flame I held. One thing's for sure, I don't think I'll be getting back into camping. The forest was lost to me, its trails forbidden, its eyes a memory I'd never escape, a vow I'd keep, a silence I'd carry forever. The drive home was a blur, the road endless, the forest fading, its mimic a secret it kept. The campsite was a ghost, its trees a jury, their verdict delivered in those glowing eyes. That mirrored voice. I parked, unpacked, and locked my door, the city a refuge, its noise a shield. But the forest lingered, its breath in my dreams, its mimic a shadow that followed, a truth no one believed, a terror that ended my nights in the wild. The woods are hers now, her white eyes watching, her voice my own, a mimic that claimed the night, and me forever. The Watcher in the Woods. The South Carolina mountains were a world apart. Their rugged peaks a call to adventure for our group of 4. I was camping with the same 2 guys to the last trip I talked about, except this time, there was a 4th person among us, who wasn't a former Boy Scout but just a good friend. We sought a secluded escape, a campsite hidden deep in the wilderness. This was a much more serious camp out. We drove to South Carolina for 4 nights in 5 days, and this time, we had a very secluded site to ourselves. A dirt road led us to a river's edge. What secrets hide in these hills? Our campsite, nestled on the river's upper banks, was a haven after a long hike. After driving on a dirt road for a few miles, the road came to a loop at the end, and we parked our cars, then hiked downhill. We hiked a short distance to our campsite, which was on the upper banks of a river. The shallow waters invited exploration, the terrain a thrilling challenge. The river was only ankle-deep in most places, with some waist-deep basins. Vegetation was diver RSE, and the terrain was mountainous. We planned to fish and roam. Why does it feel so untouched? We brought some fishing gear along with plans to explore the river. The days blurred with camaraderie, but tension simmered by the third day. We were all enjoying the trip though, but by the second or third day, we were all starting to wear on each other a bit. A plan to visit Sliding Rock in North Carolina split us. That's when somebody had the great idea to cross the state line to North Carolina, which wasn't far off, and go to this place called Sliding Rock. I stayed behind. A reckless choice against scout rules. We came to the decision that the three of them would go for their little half-day trip, and I would stay behind and watch the campsite while they were gone. Was that a mistake? Alone, I savored the quiet, catching my first fish, a catfish lured by grits. I washed out the pot in the river right by camp, and I casted my line into the lingering cloud of food, which is how I caught my first ever fish. A little catfish that came to eat my grits. Venturing downstream, I hooked a smallmouth bass, but danger stirred. I went down about a 4-mile and cast off over some rapids, eventually catching a baby smallmouth bass. A twig snap, and leeches on my legs sent me scrambling. Suddenly, I heard a twig snap in the steep woods of the riverbank to my right, and I stood up quickly looking for movement. I noticed my legs and groin region were covered in dozens of tiny little leeches. Who's out there? Back at camp, a stranger named Bo appeared, claiming the mountains as his own, his watchful eyes unsettling. When we hiked back into camp, we saw him. He was standing in the river right by camp, and he was talking to our 2 other friends. Apparently, this guy's name was Bo, and he claimed to own this entire region of mountains. He'd seen me alone, a chilling revelation. He looked over to me and told my friend that he had seen me in the river earlier and was about to come talk to me until I got spooked and ran off. We sent him away, but his shadow lingered. Is he still watching? The journey to South Carolina was a deliberate escape, a chance to trade Florida's flat familiarity for the Appalachian wilds. We drove to South Carolina. Our group, 3 former scouts and 1 novice friend, was eager for the challenge. Except this time, there was a 4th person among us who wasn't a former Boy Scout. The dirt road's end marked our starting point, a loop where we left our cars for a downhill trek. After driving on a dirt road for a few miles, the road came to a loop at the end, and we parked our cars, then hiked downhill. The river's banks welcomed us, a base for our adventure, which was on the upper banks of a river. The landscape was alien, its steep basins and dense flora a stark contrast to home. Vegetation was diver RSE, and the terrain was mountainous, which made it quite alien to our Florian sensibilities, but all the more enjoyable for it. The shallow river, barely ankle-deep, was our playground. The river was only ankle-deep in most places. We fished, our rods casting hopeful arcs, though my novice skills yielded little. We brought some fishing gear, unfortunately, as a beginner fisherman. I wasn't having any luck, yet the trip's joy was in the shared struggle, until it wasn't. We were all enjoying the trip. By the third day, small frictions frayed our bonds. The group's harmony strained. We were all starting to wear on each other a bit. The Sliding Rock excursion was a spark of division. Cross the state line to North Carolina, which wasn't far off, and go to this place called Sliding Rock. I opted out, craving solitude, a choice that defied scout training. Everybody else wanted to go though, and here's where we made a pretty stupid mistake in Boy Scouts. They teach you about the buddy system, where if you are ever in any wilderness of any kind, you never go out alone. We ignored the rule, assuming safety in our uneventful days. We hadn't run into any sort of danger in the first 48 hours. Alone. The campsite was a sanctuary. The fire's crackle my only company. I know it's not the safest or smartest thing to do considering my phone was about to die. I cooked grits, read, and cleaned by the river, my line catching that catfish. I made some cheesy grits on the fire for lunch, then I read for an hour or so. The photo I sent my friends was a triumph, my luck pushing me downstream. I took a photo and sent it to my friends, then with a feeling of luck on my side, set the catfish free and ventured downriver to try for another. The bass was a small victory, but the river's peace was fleeting, eventually catching a baby smallmouth bass, resting on a rock. The wilderness's beauty enveloped me until a primal unease took hold. I decided to take a little rest, and I sat on one of the rocks in the gentle rapids. I was enjoying the scenery when I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was alone, far from home, in Appalachian territory. I had the thought that I was completely alone out there, hundreds of miles away from home, in unfamiliar territory. Appalachian territory. The twig's snap was a jolt, my eyes scanning the woods. Suddenly, I heard a twig snap. The leeches were a shock, their tiny forms clinging to me. I noticed my legs and groin region were covered in dozens of tiny little leeches. I freaked out and started frantically picking them off. My retreat to camp was hasty, a misstep bruising my foot on a cypress knee. Then, when I felt like I got all of them, I hoofed back onto camp. On the way, I jumped onto a bank and landed my bare right foot on a small cypress knee, bruising the arc of my foot. Pretty bad. Safety was my focus now. The wilderness no longer a friend. I was starting to get concerned with my safety, feeling like I stepped a little too far out of my comfort zone. But I was more cautious from there on. At camp, I checked for stragglers, my vulnerability stark. I got safely back to camp. I was still alone though, and still worried about those leeches, so I stripped down to nothing and used the only mirror we had at camp to check myself over more thoroughly. In my hammock, a beer and cigarette calmed my nerves. The wait for my friends, a quiet reprieve. When I was sure there wasn't any more stragglers, I got dressed and laid in my hammock with a beer and cigarette and waited for my friends to come back. Their return brought stories, but also a stranger. Bo, standing in the river, engaging my friends. A little while later they returned, and when we hiked back into camp we saw him. He was standing in the river right by camp, and he was talking to our two other friends. Their defensive stance spoke volumes. I could tell by the way they were situated that they were on edge and had taken a defensive stance to wait for me and the other guy to get back so we could really outnumber whoever it was. Bo was a mountain man, his gear suggesting a life untethered. He was geared up like he lived out of his backpack, and I'm sure he did. He was a mountain man through and through. His speech, muddled by missing teeth, was hard to parse. I never got close enough to hear what he was saying, but he was almost unintelligible from his lack of teeth anyway. He claimed dominion over the mountains, granting us leave to stay. Apparently this guy's name was Bo, and he claimed to own this entire region of mountains. Graciously, he allowed us to stay with his permission, as long as we continued to be respectful. His gaze on me was chilling. He'd watched me by the river. He looked over to me and told my friend that he had seen me in the river earlier and was about to come talk to me until I got spooked and ran off. His scrutiny of our camp felt predatory, his demeanor unstable. That's when I realized he must have been watching me the entire time, or at least for a lot of it, regardless the way he yet up. Our entire campsite was suspicious. He seemed a little delusional and unpredictable. I shuddered at the thought of him approaching me alone. I'm immensely grateful that he didn't approach me while I was alone. Things could have gone a lot differently if he felt like he had a chance at overpowering just one or two of us for a shot of getting some supplies, or getting one of us. His confidence hinted at a weapon. He was most definitely armed as well. He just had that confidence about him. My friend sensed his unease, his steps too close for comfort. From what my friends who talked to him said, they were very untable. He was stepping closer to our camp. His stance in the river was a silent challenge. He was standing Riv finally backed the water. With that was a telltale sign that you might have not had the best intentions in mind. We convinced him to leave. A tense negotiation. Eventually, though, we were able to get him to leave. But his presence lingered, a specter in the trees. But we never quite trusted that he wasn't lurking in the mountains all around us, watching us. For the remaining nights, we kept watch, trading shifts under the stars. For the rest of our time there, we traded off shifts of the night watch in case Bo came back. The forest's sounds, owls, rustling leaves, became threats, each noise a potential return. He never did. But I'll tell you, the blood-curdling shriek of an owl is not something you want to hear in the middle of a night like that. Bo never reappeared, but the mountains felt alive, his eyes a constant possibility. Is he still out there, waiting? The wilderness, once inviting, was now a place of vigilance, its silence a mask for unseen watchers. The snowbound intruder. The cabin's warmth was my refuge after a day on the slopes, but a stranger's footsteps in the snow shattered the peace. I heard footsteps coming through the snow. A bearded man stood at my door, claiming a booking mistake, his smile too sharp. He said he had booked this cabin for tonight. His excuse faltered, and his lingering gaze chilled me. Was he lost? Or had he come for Mars or me? Snow fell softly outside, but danger was closer than the cold. I cautiously walked up and opened the door. A man's sudden appearance at my cabin felt wrong. His request to enter too bold. Could I maybe come inside for a minute while I figure this out just to escape the cold? I refused. But later, a figure in the woods proved he hadn't left. What was he hiding? The rural cabin was my winter escape, until a knock turned it into a trap. As I got up to see who it was, I realized they didn't knock. A stranger's claim to my space unraveled under scrutiny, his intentions veiled. I told him he had to be mistaken, and I asked if he could show his receipt. Hours later, his shadow loomed in the trees. Was I his target all along? Firelight flickered in the cabin, but the night held a darker threat. I spotted something else, someone standing out in the woods. A man who'd tried to charm his way inside was back, watching from the forest's edge. I couldn't tell if it was the same man or not, but I had no reason to believe it was anyone else. His tools and knife revealed a sinister plan. How close had I come to disaster? The cold bit deeper as I sat by the hearth, unaware of the danger outside. I sat by the fireplace to wind down for the night. A man's knock was just the start. His return under cover of snow was a warning. They had a sling bag on him with several tools commonly used with breaking into homes. I survived, but the fear lingers. Had I not checked before going to bed, I likely wouldn't even be here right now. I was staying at a cabin in a pretty rural town near a skiing resort I like to go to every winter. The cabin was a cozy retreat, tucked away in a quiet valley surrounded by snow-dusted pines, a budget-friendly alternative to the pricey resort nearby. The resort was really expensive to stay at, so a lot of people use these cabins instead. Each winter, I escaped here to ski, breathe the crisp air, and savor the solitude of the mountains. My days were filled with runs down the slopes, the rush of cold wind, and the glow of the fireplace at night after a long day on the mountain. I returned to the cabin, my muscles aching but my spirit high. I had spent the whole day skiing. The sun had dipped below the peaks, and the cold sharpened, driving me inside earlier than planned. I cut the day a bit short because the cold really set in after the sun went down. I showered, the hot water easing the chill, and made a simple dinner of soup and bread. Showered and ate, settling by the fire. I let the crackling logs and a warm blanket melt the day's fatigue. I sat by the fireplace to wind down for the night. Then, a sound broke the stillness. Footsteps crunching through the snow outside. I heard footsteps coming through the snow. They approached the door, deliberate and heavy. They came up to the door. I froze, waiting for a knock, but none came at first. As I got up to see who it was, I realized they didn't knock. Curiosity and caution pulled me toward the door. I cautiously walked up and opened the door. As a renter, I felt compelled to answer, unsure if it was the owner or a neighbor. I think since it wasn't my place, I felt like I had to answer the door for some reason. A man stood on the porch, his dark hair and thick beard framing a weathered face. There was a man, maybe late 30s, with dark hair and a thick beard. He flinched slightly when I opened the door, but the reaction seemed off, almost staged. He jumped a little when I opened the door, but it was delayed, almost like he was faking it. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the unease creeping in. "Can I help you?" He smiled, his eyes glinting in the porch light. He smiled and asked who I was. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone oddly casual. I mirrored his question, wary. I asked him the same question. He claimed he'd booked the cabin for the night. He said he had booked this cabin for tonight. I frowned, knowing I'd reserved it for the week. I told him he had to be mistaken, and I asked if he could show his receipt. "Can you show a receipt?" I pressed. He mumbled an excuse, something about a lost email, his story unraveling. But he made up an excuse. The situation felt wrong. Well, now it was weird I didn't know what else to say. I stood firm, saying, "Sorry, this is my place," and began closing the door. I knew I had the cabin for the week, so I just said sorry and started to close the door. He pushed against it, his smile returning. He put his hand on it and stopped me. "Could I come inside for a minute, just to escape the cold?" he asked, his voice smooth. Could I maybe come inside for a minute while I figure this out, just to escape the cold? His persistence unnerved me. Maybe I was being harsh, but something about this guy really put me off. "No, sorry," I said, shutting the door firmly. I said sorry again and closed the door. I listened, heart pounding, as he lingered on the porch for half a minute before walking away. I waited, listening to make sure he left. He didn't move for a while, like 30 seconds. Then he finally walked away. The encounter left me rattled, but I assumed it was a mix-up. That was really strange, but I figured if something was wrong, I'd probably get a call later. I returned to the living room, trying to shake it off. I sat back down. I turned on the TV, keeping the volume low, and scrolled through my phone, munching on snacks. I turned on the TV just on some random show, and on low volume, I scrolled a bit on my phone and had a couple snacks. The fire's warmth and the show's hum dulled my nerves, but exhaustion soon set in. I was getting really tired. As I considered bed, the man's face resurfaced in my mind, his odd smile haunting me. As I laid there, that man that came by earlier suddenly popped in my head again. I couldn't place why, but I felt compelled to check the door. I ended up going back to the door, peering outside. I saw only snow and darkness, the cold biting through the glass. I looked out. It was snowy and dark, and it looked even colder. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the woods, barely visible among the trees. I spotted something else, someone standing out in the woods. It could be him, though I couldn't be sure. I couldn't tell if it was the same man or not, but I had no reason to believe it was anyone else. My stomach twisted. I called the cabin's management company, who contacted the police. I went back to the couch and called up the property that owned the cabins they called the police. The wait was tense, but the police arrived quickly, their flashlights cutting through the snow. It actually didn't take long before 2 officers came walking down the path. The figure in the woods tried to flee, but they caught him. The man saw them too, but they didn't let him get away. His sling bag held burglary tools and a hunting knife. His intentions clear. They had a sling bag on him, with several tools commonly used with breaking into homes, as well as a hunting knife. It's pretty obvious what he was going to do. He'd never booked the cabin. His story was a ruse. He never booked the place like he said he had. I was lucky to have checked the door. Had I not checked before going to bed, I likely wouldn't even be here right now. Had I slept, he might have broken in silently. It was definitely just him trying to get in easily. I left the cabin the next day, the peace shattered. I've searched X for similar incidents, finding tales of prowlers near resorts, but none match the calculated deceit of my snowbound intruder. The mountains still call, but now I lock every door and watch the shadows, haunted by what might have been. The knocker at the door. I live in a neighborhood home with my older sister. We rent the place and split the bills. Our house is small, cozy, tucked in a quiet suburb where everyone knows their neighbors, or so I thought. My sister had plans to meet up with some friends in Florida, so she would be gone for almost a whole week. She packed her bags, her laughter filling the house before she left. She invited me, but I couldn't take the time off work. I stayed behind, ready for a week alone, a chance to breathe. But why did the empty house feel like it was waiting for something? She left on Monday morning, which was a day I didn't work. The house was mine, a rare gift of solitude. I cleaned up the house and just enjoyed having some time alone. I scrubbed counters, played music, savored the quiet. Around 2, there was a knock at the door. The sound was sharp, unexpected, cutting through my playlist. I thought it was maybe a package my sister had ordered, so I answered it. I opened the door, expecting a delivery, but instead, a stranger stood there. Why was he looking at me like he knew me? It was an older man, like early 40s. His clothes were plain, worn, his face lined but unreadable. He wasn't holding a package or anything, though. I forced a smile, polite but cautious. "Hi, how can I help you?" I asked. The man looked me in the eyes for an unsettling amount of time before answering. His stare was heavy, too long, piercing. "Oh, I just wanted to see who lived here. Sorry, didn't mean to bother you," he said, his voice soft but odd. What did he want with a stranger's home? He smiled and nodded, then walked away. The door clicked shut, but his words lingered, a puzzle I couldn't solve. I thought that was strange and wasn't really sure what he meant by that. I shook it off, returning to my day. But unease crept in. The following day, I had work, so I woke up early and headed down to the office. The day was busy, routine, but my mind drifted to him. I got back home at 6 only a half hour later, and while I was cooking dinner, there was a knock at the door again. Why was he back? Wearing the same clothes. I looked out the peephole before answering this time, and it was the same man from yesterday. His face was unmistakable, his outfit unchanged. He was easy to recognize because he wore the same exact clothes. My pulse quickened, my hand hesitating on the knob. I opened the door, though I was a bit more hesitant this time, only cracking it open. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice tight. He smiled and said, of course, as if I was being silly for asking that. His tone was wrong, too familiar. Why did he act like he belonged there? He then said he was just checking in on me. The words landed like a stone, his smile widening as if we shared a secret. The way he said it was like he was expected or something. My stomach twisted, the air growing heavy. "Oh, are you a neighbor of mine I didn't know?" I said, grasping for an explanation. I assumed he must be one of those older nosy neighbors. It didn't quite fit, but it was something. "Oh no, I was just walking around," he replied, his eyes never leaving mine. He was really starting to creep me out now. I said I was fine and closed the door. My voice was firm, my hand quick to lock the bolt. I waited for him to leave my porch, then went back to cooking. I stood by the stove, the sizzle of onions a distant hum, my eyes darting to the door. I texted my sister that night, asking if she'd ever encountered that man. Her reply was quick. She said no one like him, no strange visitors. I was paranoid the rest of the night. The house felt smaller, the locks flimsier. I felt safe inside my home, all the doors were locked and everything. But I also felt like I was being stalked and watched. The night passed again with no more signs of him. I slept fitfully, the man's face lingering in my dreams. Same with the following day. Work was a blur, my mind replaying his words. I just wanted to see who lived here. He didn't knock on the door, and I had hoped it might actually be nothing to worry about. I checked the windows, the locks, convincing myself it was a fluke. The day after I had off work, and it was the last day that my sister would be gone for. The house was mine again, a chance to reclaim the calm. I spent most of my time inside, and just hanging out reading and watching YouTube. The day was lazy, the TV a soft hum, my book a shield against the quiet. Every so often I'd peek out the windows just to be cautious. The street was empty, the neighborhood still, but my nerves hummed. I never saw anything. The normalcy was almost reassuring. The man, a fading shadow. Around 8, I was watching TV. The screen glowed, a sitcom's laughter filling the room. Then I heard something scrape against the outside of the house. A sharp, deliberate sound, like a stick dragging along the siding. What was out there? So close to my home. I quickly got up and opened the blinds, seeing the bush right under the window shaking. The leaves trembled, as if someone had just brushed past. I could hear footsteps running away. They were faint, fading into the dark, but real. I couldn't see anything else in the dark, though. My stomach churned, bile rising. I felt like I was going to throw up. It had to be him. Surely it was the same man. How long was he there? Was he sitting in the bushes trying to watch me through the window? The thought was a violation. My safe space shattered. I was so out of it I didn't know what to do and ended up calling my sister. My hands shook as I dialed, her voice a lifeline. Luckily for me, she picked up. I stammered, trying to explain. I tried to explain to her what was going on, but I think I was talking too fast. The words spilled, frantic, as I paced. Midway through the conversation, there was a knock at the door. The sound was loud, insistent, cutting through my voice. I didn't answer, but the man started calling out and knocking louder. His voice was desperate, pleading. He asked me to let him in and tried to guilt-trip me by saying he was injured. Why was he so determined to get inside? He made excuses for being outside my home and then started apologizing for everything. His words were a jumble. Sorry, hurt, please, Open the door." He continued to bang on the door. The thuds were relentless, the wood shaking. It was creepy and disturbing how desperate he was for me to open the door. My fear turned to dread, his voice a threat cloaked in apology. Clearly something was wrong with him. My sister's voice sharpened. My sister told me to call 911 immediately. I hung up and did as she said. The operator's calm cut through my panic, guiding me to stay safe. The man stayed at the door for a whole 5 minutes, still trying to convince me to let him in. His pleas grew frantic, then quiet, his knocks slowing, before he finally left. The silence that followed was worse, heavy with the fear he'd return. What the man actually wanted is unknown, and how long he was stalking me for is also unknown. Had he been watching all week? He could have somehow figured out my sister was gone for the week. The timing felt too perfect, too planned. It just seems like too big of a coincidence. I stayed awake, lights on, until dawn. The door, a barrier I no longer trusted. The police came, their flashlights sweeping the yard. They found footprints in the mud, scuff marks by the bush, but no man. I haven't seen him at all since then. The neighborhood returned to its quiet rhythm, but I didn't. Hopefully it's over. I added deadbolts, a security camera, checked the windows obsessively. My sister came home, her hugs tight, her questions gentle. We talked, piecing together the week, but found no answers. I felt like I was being stalked and watched. That feeling clung, a shadow in every corner. I asked neighbors, hoping for clues. Most knew nothing, but one, an older woman, mentioned a man loitering, always alone, always watching. She'd seen him before, never spoke to him, but his presence was enough to lock her doors. I searched online, local news, forums. I did my own research, but found no trace of him, no arrests, no reports. What could that man possibly want that wasn't something creepy? His excuses, his knocks, he started banging on the door, were a violation, a theft of my peace. I moved later, a new place, new locks, but the memory stays, a reminder that safety is fragile, and some strangers carry secrets that don't need a reason to knock. The robbers in the dark. The night is yours, a blur of revelry and exhaustion. You stumble home, collapse, and drift off. But what happens when your open door invites danger? You wake to darkness, your home breached. Footsteps creak above, voices murmur below. Strangers roam your house, their casual chatter chilling your blood. You're hidden, heart pounding, behind a flimsy shield. They're close, too close, rummaging through your life. One step nearer, and they'll see you. This isn't just a robbery, it's an invasion, a violation by men who act like they own your home. They're not rushing, they're waiting. For what? This is the night Alex learned their carelessness nearly cost them everything. By the time you hear the end, you'll double-check your doors at night. The house was a modest sanctuary, its weathered walls a haven for Alex, who lived alone after a night of celebration. They'd gotten an Uber back to their place after partying all night. The festivities left them buzzed, head throbbing, limbs heavy. They don't think they were plastered or anything, but they definitely were well beyond tipsy and they had a raging headache. When they got dropped off, they slowly made their way up to the front door and fumbled around with their keys for way too long before making it inside. They tossed everything on the floor and took an ibuprofen, then fell over on the couch. The couch embraced them, a refuge from the pounding in their skull. They were exhausted and tired, but the headache was keeping them from sleeping, so they kind of just laid there with their eyes closed for a while. They honestly have no idea how long. Sleep eluded them. The pain relentless. Randomly, though, the doorbell rang. It rang several times, and they never got up to answer the door or even see who it was. At the moment, they didn't even care or think about it. They just wanted to lay there and try to sleep and not be bothered. The insistent ringing barely registered, dismissed in their haze. Obviously, someone ringing their doorbell repeatedly should be pretty concerning. But like they said, they had a bit too much to drink. Surprisingly, not too long after they stopped ringing the doorbell, they actually managed to pass out on the couch. The house was silent, but not safe. Alex stirred. Groggy, the darkness hiding a truth that would soon shatter their peace. They couldn't say how long they were asleep for, but when they woke up, they were very groggy and felt weak still with a pounding headache, and the whole house was dark. The headache persisted, clouding their senses. They stood up and tried to make their way to the kitchen to get a glass of water, when they noticed a streak of light on the wall in the hallway. Even in their not-so-sober state, it was unmistakable what it was. The light was coming from the front door, being partially open, and moonlight spilling into the house. Were they really so drunk that they didn't close the door? There was no way. The open door was a shock, a mistake they couldn't believe. Before they could even walk into the hallway and look at the door, footsteps moved around upstairs. They froze, then hurried back to the couch and ducked behind it. There were 2 sets of footsteps walking right above them. Panic surged, pinning them behind the sofa. They thought about making a run for it, but their hesitation ruined their chances as the footsteps began making their way down the stairs. There was a pause, then the sound of the front door shutting, and the streak of light disappeared. "All right, let's get on with it," a man spoke. Alex's heart thundered. The men's voices a chilling contrast to their crime. They weren't just here. They were at home in their home. They were completely sobered up now and realized they probably had just gotten inside moments before they woke up and immediately checked the bedrooms upstairs. Not seeing anyone, they assumed the place was empty. Their chest felt like it was burning from how fast their heart was racing. The men moved around in the room on the other side of the house and began chatting like everyday regular talk about life. Something about it was so disturbing and terrifying. If they were so comfortable breaking into their home and having casual conversations while doing so, then what the hell were they going to do if they found them? The men's banter was mundane, terrifying in its normalcy. They could hear them taking things, robbing all the rooms in the house before the footsteps made their way into the living room. The way they had it set up, the couch was diagonal in the corner, so they were kind of closed off behind it. But the couch was also short, so if they got close to it, they would easily be able to see them. They just listened as they walked around moving things and opening every drawer and box they saw. Drawers scraped, boxes rattled, their life dissected. The air was thick with dread, each step a threat. Alex held their breath, the sofa their only shield, as one man drew too close. Then, one of the men started walking closer to the couch. They hoped and waited for their footsteps to stop or change directions, but they kept coming closer and closer until they saw their head show above them. They were looking down at the cushions, though, and they guessed they didn't see them in the sight of their vision. Then they moved on to the next room. A shadow loomed, then passed, oblivious. They sat there motionless for a long time, listening to them rummage through the entire house before they finally left. They didn't hear them say anything about coming back, but they grabbed their phone and ducked back behind the couch as they called the cops. Alex dialed. Voice a whisper. Fear unrelenting. The situation is mostly exactly what it seems like. The men came in and robbed the valuables from their home. They had forgotten to lock the front door. but there's some evidence that it wouldn't have mattered. A neighbor said they saw two men watching their house rather suspiciously. Over the course of the past week, likely they saw that they lived alone and always parked in the driveway, so when they took their car to the party and came back in an Uber without their car, they thought they weren't home. Thankfully, it seems they only intended to rob them and nothing more, but had they found them, who knows what could have happened. The neighbor's report suggested a plan. The open door, a cruel twist of fate. Alex moved. The house's darkness a reminder of a night when carelessness invited terror. The warning bark. A quiet night at home turned chilling. The glow of the TV a false comfort, as Hazel, a loyal dog, sensed a danger her owner couldn't see. She barked at the fence, her instincts sharp, a warning echoing into the dark. The woods beyond the fence held secrets. Hazel's barks a plea, her gaze fixed on the back door. Her owner called her in, but the dog's unease lingered, a silent alarm that something or someone was near, watching. On the couch, Hazel sat rigid, her eyes locked on the door, refusing to relax. Her protective mode a signal ignored. The house was still, the night deep, but a creeping dread began to seep into the air. In bed, the door creaked wider. Hazel gone, the silence heavy with fear. Downstairs, the dog shivered under the kitchen table. The back door open, a breach in the night. An intruder's trace left in the shadows. Escape was swift. Hazel in arms. The neighbor's door a refuge. The police called. Footprints marked the house, but the intruder was gone, leaving questions and fear, a haunting uncertainty that lingered in the night. I was at home with my dog Hazel. It was a normal night. The house was warm. The night routine. Hazel a comforting presence. I'd gotten out of work already and was just trying to enjoy the few hours I had before bed. The day was done. The hours mine. A brief escape from the grind. I was watching TV and eating some snacks when Hazel got up and went to the back door wanting to be let out. The TV glowed. The snacks crunched. Hazel's movement a gentle interruption. I got up and let her outside to do her business. I had a pretty small fenced-in backyard, so I never really needed to keep an eye on her too much. The yard was secure, the fence sturdy, Hazel free to roam within its bounds. Usually she'd stay out for a while and sniff around anyway. While I was up, I put some dishes away and cleaned up the mess I made from cooking earlier. The dishes clinked, the mess cleared. Hazel's absence a familiar rhythm. When Hazel started barking, she liked to bark at squirrels and stuff. Her barks were sharp, her target unseen, a common chase in the yard. But after a few seconds, she still hadn't let up. I walked over to the back door and opened it. Her persistence was odd, my steps quick. The door a window to her alarm. Seeing Hazel standing by the side of the fence and barking at it like something was on the other side. Her stance was tense, her focus fierce. The fence a barrier to the unknown. It was just woods on that side of the fence, so I thought maybe she'd seen a coyote or something. The trees were dark, their shadows deep, a wild creature the likely culprit. Just to be safe, I called her back inside. Caution guided me. Her safety first. The woods a mystery I didn't trust. I got back on the couch and turned the TV on. The couch was soft. The TV a hum. Normalcy, a fragile hope. Something was immediately different about Hazel, though usually she'd lay on or next to me. But she was sitting on the edge of the couch, head perked up and staring at the back door. Her change was stark, her gaze intense, a silent warning I couldn't read. No matter how much I'd call her over, She'd just glance at me, then go back to watching. Her stubbornness was new, her focus unwavering, the door her obsession. She was like this for the rest of the night. A couple times I did look over there, but saw nothing. The night stretched, her vigil constant, my checks empty of answers. I thought she was just in protective mode for some reason, which she does randomly sometimes. Her instinct was familiar, her mode a shield, a quirk I dismissed. We stayed up for a bit, then went to bed. Hazel usually sleeps on the end of my bed or on her doggy bed in the corner of the room. The routine was set, her spot chosen. The night a quiet close, but I always leave the bedroom door cracked open because her food and water is downstairs. The crack was small, her access free, a habit for her needs. When I woke up in the middle of the night, I noticed the bedroom door was wide open, much more than I had left it. The door's gap was wrong, its width a shock, the night suddenly heavy. Maybe she bumped into the door, she wasn't in the room, and I didn't hear her nails clicking on the wooden floor or the sound of her eating or drinking. Her absence was a void, the silence eerie, her sounds missing. On any other day, I'd probably just go back to sleep and not worry about it. But something gave me a bad gut feeling. Even my body seemed to have fully woken up already. Instinct screamed, my body alert. Fear a sudden guest. I got out of bed and looked out into the hallway. The house was quiet. Hazel. The hallway was dark, the silence thick, my call a whisper in the void. I walked down the steps and into the living room. Everything seemed to be normal, but all the food and water in her bowls were still full. The room was still, the bowls untouched, a sign something was wrong. At this point, everything was rushing through my mind. I was scared. Maybe somehow I'd left the back door open and she ran away or something, even though I knew I didn't. Panic surged, my fears wild. The door, a question I couldn't answer. I walked into the kitchen and my heart sank, seeing Hazel crouched underneath the table, shivering and shaking, and staring at me, completely terrified of something. Her fear was a mirror, her trembling a cry, terror etched in her eyes. I called her name again, and she didn't move. And then I noticed the back door was open. Her stillness was a warning, the door a breach, danger a breath away. Everything was starting to come together in my mind, but I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped and scared and vulnerable. The pieces fit. My fear a cage, the house no longer safe. I hurried over to the table and picked Hazel up, then ran right out the back door. I left through the fence gate and ran over to a neighbor's house. Hazel was heavy, my run desperate, the neighbor's door a lifeline. It took a while, but eventually they woke up and answered the door, calling the police for me. Their response was slow. The police a hope, safety a fragile thread. When officers searched my home, they didn't find anyone. There were a few signs of shoe prints around the house, though, some even being upstairs. The prints were a trace, the intruder gone, their presence a haunting mark. That whole scenario is so confusing and left me with hundreds of questions and zero answers. The mystery was vast, the answers lost, fear a lingering guest. I don't know who it was or why they broke in, or even how long they'd been inside for. Were they the one to open my bedroom door all the way? Were they hiding? When I was looking for Hazel, were they even still in the house? The questions swirled, the unknowns deep, the night a puzzle unsolved. I almost wish I encountered them before running away, so I'd at least have some sort of answers. Now I'm left with nothing. I just have to live and hope it was some random thing and that they don't come back. The wish was hollow, the fear real. the hope a fragile shield against the dark. The waves that took Tyler. The condo's balcony overlooked a moonless beach, its waves a rhythmic promise of freedom. My friends and I, high school seniors, piled into Tyler's dad's new place, ready for a spring break blowout. During spring break of my senior year of high school, I went on a trip to the beach with my group of friends. My best friend Tyler went too. His dad just bought a condo right on the beach. We were young, reckless, and drunk on possibility. But the ocean had plans we didn't see, and it claimed one of us forever. This is the story of a party that ended in tragedy, and a friend I couldn't save. The condo was our playground, a bare-bones haven for chaos. But he hadn't set it up to rent it out yet, so he let us party in it for a few days, as long as we didn't wreck the place. Nothing beat nights of carefree revelry. Nothing sounded better than multiple nights of living completely carefree and hanging out with just the people we liked, especially since there were girls involved. Couches and air mattresses were fine with us, even if the place was a little bare bones, and some of us would end up sleeping on couches or air mattresses that didn't matter so much. We pooled for liquor and beer, because of course we all pitched in on a couple of bottles and a few cases of beer, which we would be passing around the whole time. Tyler worried about his dad's rules. Tyler was initially apprehensive about having alcohol inside the condo, as he was worried about getting caught by his dad and not being allowed to party there ever again. We convinced him, letting him drink free. Everybody convinced him it wasn't a big deal though, and to make it more tempting since it was his condo, we let him drink as much as he wanted without having to pay his share. That was a mistake. Admittedly, that was not a great idea, because for being the one who was nervous about it, Tyler drank more than any of us. He outdrank us all. Some of the guys gave him flack for it and said he was taking advantage of the fact that he didn't have to buy any of it. But then it was already too late, because a new kind of Tyler was unleashed and he was just knocking back the drinks. As his best friend, I matched him. I was his best friend, which made me feel like I had to keep up with him. None of us stayed sober. None of us were experienced drinkers, so there was no thought about anyone staying at all sober to take care of the rest of us. The first night blurred into madness. By the time the sun set on the first evening, we were all wasted. Music thumped. Games raged. Some got sick. The hours dragged on. The music kept blasting, and there were games played. Some people got sick, and some people were caught getting it on. We crashed in the living room, spent. But after a while, things started to die down. There was a point at which we were all winding down and all sitting around the living room not really talking or doing anything. Tyler sprang up, wild. That's when Tyler jumped up out of nowhere and made a bunch of noise, trying to get us all hyped again. He kept saying stuff like, "It's only midnight. You quitters, the night is still young." He pushed drinks on us, and he was walking around to everybody handing them drinks, all while he was slamming beers too. We were too tired to rally. We were all pretty tired, so we didn't exactly respond to it. Then he suggested the beach, until he had a different idea. "Hey everyone, let's go to the beach," he shouted at the top of his lungs. His words ignited us. I can hear those words ringing through my head. To this day, it was such a bad idea still. And I don't know why, but as soon as he said it, we all agreed instantly and shot up to party again. We ignored the late hour. We didn't want to get more drunk just to keep sitting around, but we were definitely down for something else to do. There was a brief moment where one of us mentioned that it was the middle of the night and nobody was supposed to go to the beach around then. The forbidden thrilled us. Then, that was answered with enthusiasm instead of deterring us. It was going to be so cool to have the beach to ourselves and be there at the wrong time of the day, We felt invincible. There were so many of us together. What could go wrong? We downed more drinks, charging out. We killed the first bottle right then and there, and we each slammed another beer or two before heading out. The beach was steps away. We hadn't even changed out of our clothes into our bathing suits. It seemed like it was the perfect happenstance, too, that the beach was right on our doorstep. We didn't even have to cross a single street to get there. That was the most dangerous part about being a bunch of drunk fools in the dark. I figured. So it was fine. Tyler proposed skinny dipping. Tyler was on a roll with the suggestions and said we should all go skinny dipping again. We all thought that was very exciting. We agreed. Shedding clothes. Everybody had at least one other person there that they wanted to see naked. So it was a shame that it was a new moon, and we could barely see anything that made it less nerve-wracking, though. So even if you were self-conscious, you couldn't get out of it, really. Then, just like that, we all took off what little clothes we were wearing and left them in the sand before charging into the water. The water was freezing. It was surprisingly cold, but we were so drunk we had no problem powering through it. We waded deep, waves crashing. We waded out against the crashing waves until our feet weren't touching the ground. The girls stopped, treading water. Tyler wanted to keep going, but the girls stopped because they were a lot shorter than us and were already treading water for a while, so of course most of the guys stayed with them. Tyler swam on, alone. Tyler, on the other hand, hadn't been hitting on any of them, and was basically in his own world that sometimes had me involved in it, so he pressed on, breaking out into a full-on swim. I followed, struggling. I chased after him, trying to keep in my line of sight. But unfortunately, the waves were really high, even though they weren't breaking on us anymore. Nausea hit me. I started to feel sick from the motion, like I might throw up all my drinks straight into the ocean, and I was getting cold and tired. I lost him. Eventually, I stopped and treaded water. I couldn't see Tyler anymore. I called, but he was gone. I called his name, but there was no response, not a shout back, not even splashing. Swam out a little further, and I called his name again as loud as I could, but still just silence. Panic surged, my throat tight. My heart started pounding, and I felt my throat closing up. I don't even know if it was the cold or just being scared of losing my friend, but it was probably a combination of both. I kept shouting, exhausted. I kept calling his name for a while until I eventually started to feel exhausted from treading water. Friends called from shore. Eventually, I heard the rest of my friends calling out to us to come back. I was surprised how quiet they sounded, as I hadn't realized how far we swam out. I swam back, hoping. Reluctantly knowing I didn't have much energy left, I turned back and swam toward the sound of their voices until I could stand again. Tyler wasn't there. I was hoping beyond hope that Tyler was with them in the darkness. I couldn't make out much detail, but I could tell they had all gotten cold or bored and were standing on the beach waiting for us as I dragged myself up to them. Completely drained. My heart sank when I counted one less person than there should have been. They thought he was with me. "Where's Tyler?" I asked them right away. There was a short pause, and they all looked at each other with concern. Then said, "They thought he was with me." His clothes remained. In a last-ditch hope, I thought maybe he had gotten around all of us and was the first to get back to the pile of clothes and get dressed. We all ran over there and picked out our clothes, putting them on, and seeing to our horror that Tyler's trunks were still there. I tried to return, stopped. I ran back to the ocean, but my friend stopped me from going back and saying it was better to wait for him to come back. We searched, finding nothing. We shined lights out into the abyss, and called his name 100 times. We couldn't see or hear a damn thing, not a single sign of him. We called 911. Broken. After about 20 or 30 minutes, one of us had to make the call to 911. We were a petrified, shivering, sloppy mess, all of us. The police arrived, but hope faded. The cops asked us questions, but didn't suspect foul play. They said they would have to wait until daybreak to send a search party out into the water. Tyler's body appeared. Lifeless, but it never got to that point. While we were all standing there, Tyler's body washed ashore. Our recklessness drowned him, a scar we carry forever. Thank you for listening till the end. Tomas, if you hear a knock at 3 a.m. tonight, don't answer it. Maybe the next story is coming. Symbiotes for you. See you in your next nightmare.